My name is Sarah. I spent 6 months and thousands of dollars planning my parents' 35th wedding anniversary gala. But an hour before the main event, my own father grabbed my arm and banished me to the dusty, detached garage because my plain dress and sweating face ruined the aesthetic for his wealthy future in-laws. He thought I would sit there in the dark and wait for permission to rejoin my own family. Instead, a panicked caterer found me out there and asked a single question that gave me the power to cancel the entire event. The white orchids were collapsing. I stood in the foyer of my parents' upscale suburban home in Connecticut, desperately trying to save a massive floral arrangement that was threatening to topple onto the imported marble floor. My plain black dress was clinging to my back. Sweat dripped down my neck. I had been running for 9 straight hours. I coordinated the delivery of the 150-person party tent in the backyard. I managed the valet parking attendants. I argued with the rental company when they brought the wrong silk tablecloths. I was 32 years old, a certified public accountant used to sitting in a quiet, climate-controlled office. But today I was the unpaid event planner, the heavy lifter, the invisible staff. The house buzzed with the manic energy. Waiters in crisp white shirts carried silver trays of appetizers past me. The string quartet was tuning their instruments out on the patio. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked like the image my parents wanted to project to the world. Wealth, stability, old-fashioned grace. Nobody looking at this house would ever guess the truth about what kept it standing. I jammed a green wooden stake into the floral foam, finally securing the heavy orchids. I let out a heavy sigh of relief and wiped my forehead with the back of my wrist. Before I could even catch my breath, fingers clamped down hard on my upper arm. I gasped and spun around. My father, Richard, stood there. He was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo that I had personally picked up from the dry cleaners that morning. His face was flushed red, but not with excitement. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust. His grip on my arm tightened. "Sarah, what on earth are you doing?" His voice was a harsh, venomous whisper. "I am fixing the flowers, Dad." They were falling over. The florist did not secure the base. He yanked me a step back away from the open archway of the living room where early guests were starting to mingle. "Look at yourself. Look at your hair. You are sweating like a farm animal. You look like the hired help." I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I look like this because I have been setting up your entire party since 6 in the morning, I said, keeping my voice low so the passing caterers would not hear. I just finished moving 40 wooden chairs because the rental guys left them in the wrong spot. "I do not care what you were doing." He snapped his eyes, darting toward the front door. "Chloe is going to be here any minute. She is pulling up with Preston and his parents. Chloe is my 29-year-old sister. She is the golden child. She has flawless blonde hair, an aspiring lifestyle blog, and a brand new engagement ring from Preston. Preston comes from an incredibly wealthy, highly conservative, old money church family. For the past 6 months, my parents had been treating Preston and his family like visiting royalty. Everything my parents did was designed to convince Preston's parents that our family belonged in their elite social circle. "I do not care if Chloe is arriving," I told him, trying to gently pull my arm free. "I am going to the kitchen to check on the catering captain, and then I will go upstairs to freshen up." "No, you will not." My father stepped into my path, completely blocking the hallway. "You are not going upstairs. Preston's mother is already walking up the driveway. If she comes in here and sees you looking like a sweaty, disheveled mess in a cheap black dress, you will humiliate this entire family. You ruin the aesthetic, Sarah. You stick out like a sore thumb." The words felt like a physical slap across the face. Ruin the aesthetic. I was his daughter. I was the person who organized every single detail of this party. I paid the deposits. I managed the vendors. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "Go out the side door," he ordered, pointing toward the laundry room. "Go out the side door and wait in the detached garage." The garage. I repeated the word, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Dad, it is cold out there. It is full of dust and moving boxes." You want me to hide in the garage during your anniversary party? Just until Preston's family is settled in the VIP tent? He hissed, his face leaning close to mine. I am not letting you ruin your sister's future because you could not be bothered to look presentable. Now get out of sight. He did not wait for my answer. He physically turned me toward the laundry room door, gave me a slight push, and then immediately spun around, pasting a giant, warm, welcoming smile onto his face as the front doorbell rang. I heard him greet Preston's mother with a booming, joyful voice. "Oh, Margaret, welcome to our home. We are so blessed to have you here." I stood in the laundry room hallway for 3 seconds, my vision blurred with hot, stinging tears. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march into the foyer and tell Margaret exactly who I was, but I did not. I opened the side door, stepped out into the cool evening air, and walked across the dark driveway to the detached garage. The garage was uninsulated, smelling of motor oil, old cardboard, and damp earth. There were no chairs. The only light came from a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling rafters. I walked over to a dusty plastic cooler pushed against the back wall, wiped off the top with my bare hand, and sat down. The cold seeped through the thin fabric of my dress immediately. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifting over from the brightly lit backyard tent. They were celebrating. My father was toasting his successful life. My sister was flaunting her perfect romance. And I was sitting on a cooler in the dark, hidden away like a shameful secret. As a certified public accountant, my entire professional life revolves around numbers, logic, and rational decisions. But when it comes to my family, all my logic vanishes. I tolerate the cruelty. I accept the disrespect. I let them treat me like a disposable servant. And sitting there in the dusty garage, I knew exactly why I let them do it. I was terrified of my father dying. 4 years ago, my father called me into his office with a grim, devastated look on his face. He told me his heart condition had worsened significantly. He said his insurance company was refusing to cover the specialized treatments he desperately needed to stay alive. He cried. He actually cried in front of me, telling me he was going to lose the house, lose his life, and leave my mother destitute. I panicked. I loved my dad. I craved his approval more than anything in the world. So I took over. I went to the bank the very next morning. I set up a joint account with my parents. And for the last 48 months, I have systematically funneled $2,500 from my own paycheck into that account on the first of every single month. Do the math. $2,500 a month. $30,000 a year. $120,000 over 4 years. That money was my future. It was supposed to be my down payment for a house. It was supposed to be my retirement fund, my safety net, my chance at a real life. Instead, I drove a 10-year-old car with a rattling engine. I lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment with ancient plumbing. I never took vacations. I never bought designer clothes. I packed my lunch every single day. Every spare dollar I earned as a CPA went directly to keeping my father breathing. I wiped a tear off my cheek, leaving a streak of dust across my face. I told myself it was worth it. Every time my mother criticized my weight, every time my sister mocked my cheap shoes, every time my father treated me like the hired help, I swallowed my pride. I reminded myself that keeping my family afloat was the noble thing to do. I was a good daughter. I was doing my duty. But banishing me to the garage, hiding me away so the wealthy future in-laws would not have to look at my tired, sweating face, that felt like a new level of cruelty. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. I could hear the faint sound of the string quartet playing a beautiful classical piece. I had paid for that quartet. I had signed the check for the deposit just 3 weeks ago when my father told me his medical bills were too high to cover the party expenses. "Sarah, honey, it is our 35th anniversary," he had told me over the phone, his voice sounding weak and pathetic. "Your mother has had such a hard year dealing with my health. She just wants one beautiful night. Please, you make so much money at the firm. You can spare a little to bring your mother some joy." So I paid for it. I paid for the quartet. I paid for the massive white tent. I put my own credit card down for the floral arrangements. I was the financial spine holding the entire family upright, but I was not good enough to stand in the foyer. I pulled my knees up to my chest and rested my chin on my arms. The garage was so quiet compared to the party outside. I told myself I would just wait 20 minutes. I would let Preston and his parents get seated at the VIP table. Then I would sneak through the kitchen door, go up the back stairs to the guest bathroom, wash my face, and quietly join the party in the back row. I would not make a scene. I would not ruin the aesthetic. I sat there doing deep breathing exercises, trying to calm my racing heart. I recited tax codes in my head to distract myself from the profound sense of humiliation washing over me. I thought about the files waiting on my desk at the accounting firm. I thought about the client meetings I had scheduled for Monday. I tried to focus on anything other than the fact that my own father viewed me as a stain on his perfect life. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The temperature in the garage seemed to drop with every passing minute. I checked my phone. No text from my mother. No message from my sister asking where I was. Nobody was looking for me. Nobody cared that I was missing from the celebration I had built with my own hands. I stood up from the cooler, dusting off the back of my plain black dress. I decided I had waited long enough. I would go through the side yard, avoid the main tent, and slip into the kitchen. The catering staff needed my final approval on the dinner service timeline anyway. Just as I took a step toward the heavy wooden garage door, I heard the crunch of gravel outside. Rapid, frantic footsteps approached the garage. The doorknob rattled wildly. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. The heavy door swung open, revealing the dark silhouette of a woman against the soft glow of the yard lights. It was Julianne, the owner of the luxury catering company. She was wearing her crisp black uniform, holding an electronic payment tablet in her hands, and she looked absolutely terrified. Her chest was heaving like she had been running. Sarah Julianne gasped, stepping into the dusty garage and pulling the door shut behind her. "Oh, thank God I found you. The valet said they saw you walk out here." "Julianne, what is wrong?" I asked, rushing over to her. "Is there an issue with the kitchen? Did the ovens lose power again?" "It is not the ovens, Sarah." Julianne lowered her voice to an urgent, panicked whisper. She looked around the dark garage as if someone might be listening from the rafters. "It is the final payment. The $25,000 charge for the premium food and the open bar. Your father insisted on running his own card for the final balance an hour ago. He said he wanted to pay for it himself." "Okay," I said slowly, trying to process her panic. "So what is the problem? Did the card reader glitch?" Julianne shook her head, her eyes wide with dread. "The card declined, Sarah. It declined hard. I called the merchant services line to manually push it through, and the bank representative told me the account is completely tapped out. Your father does not have the money. Sarah, the guests are sitting at their tables waiting for the first course. The kitchen needs your approval right now. Should we stop plating? Should we pack up the food and cancel everything?" I pulled my knees tight against my chest on the hard plastic cooler. The detached garage was freezing. It smelled of old motor oil and damp cardboard. Through the thin walls, I could hear the faint, elegant notes of the string quartet I had paid for. I could hear the muffled laughter of 150 guests mingling in the massive white tent I had rented. My parents were out there right now, clinking champagne glasses and playing the role of the wealthy suburban patriarch and matriarch. I was sitting in the dark, shivering in my plain black dress, banished because my sweaty face would ruin their perfect image. I closed my eyes and tried to force back the tears stinging my cheeks. I told myself to be rational. I was a certified public accountant. My entire life was built on logic. The logical thing to do was wait for Preston and his wealthy conservative parents to take their seats at the VIP table. Then I could quietly slip through the side yard, enter the kitchen, and hide in the background. I just needed to survive this night. I just needed to keep my father happy. His heart condition was so severe that any major stress could trigger a medical emergency. That was the only reason I put up with the cruelty. I was terrified of planning his funeral. Just as I wiped a streak of dust and mascara from my face, I heard the rapid, frantic crunch of gravel outside. Someone was running up the driveway. The heavy wooden side door of the garage rattled violently. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. The door swung open, groaning on its old hinges. A woman stood silhouetted against the soft glow of the yard lights, holding a glowing electronic payment tablet against her chest. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as if she had just sprinted across the entire property. It was Julianne. She was the owner of the luxury catering company I had hired for the anniversary gala. "Sarah," she gasped, stepping into the dusty garage and quickly pulling the door shut behind her. "Oh, thank God I found you. The valet attendant said they saw your father shove you out the side door." I stood up quickly, smoothing down my wrinkled dress, suddenly feeling completely humiliated that a vendor was witnessing my family dynamics. "Julianne, what is wrong?" I asked, stepping toward her. "Is there an issue with the staging area? Did the warming ovens trip the circuit breaker again? I can go check the electrical panel." "It is not the electrical panel, Sarah." Julianne lowered her voice to a panicked, terrified whisper. Her dark eyes were wide with dread. She looked around the dimly lit garage to make sure we were completely alone. "It is the final payment. The $25,000 remaining balance for the premium dinner service and the open bar." I frowned, confused. I knew exactly what that balance was. I had meticulously mapped out the entire budget for this 35th anniversary gala. I had maxed out my own credit cards to pay the massive deposits for the tent, the imported white orchids, the valet service, and the live music. The catering, however, was the one single invoice my father had absolutely insisted on paying himself. 3 weeks ago, my father had called me into his home office looking pale and ashamed. He told me that Preston and his highly traditional church family were accustomed to top-tier luxury. They expected prime rib carving stations. They expected a premium open bar with top-shelf scotch. They expected hand-passed crab cakes and imported caviar. My father told me he could not let Preston family think we were struggling with medical debt. He wanted to physically hand his premium rewards card to the catering manager at the end of the night. He wanted to look like a wealthy provider. He wanted their respect. I had agreed to let him take that one invoice, assuming he had saved just enough in his personal account to cover his pride. "Julianne," I said slowly, trying to process her panic. "My father told me he was going to run his card for the final balance. Did the card reader glitch?" Julianne shook her head frantically. "The card declined, Sarah. It declined hard. I called the merchant services line to manually push the transaction through, and the bank representative told me the account is completely empty. Your father does not have the money. The transaction was rejected for insufficient funds." I stared at her. My brain, trained to process complex financial data in fractions of a second, completely stalled. I looked at the electronic tablet in her trembling hands. The screen glowed with a harsh red error message. "Declined." $25,000, I whispered, letting the sheer weight of the number settle into the cold air of the garage. "Sarah, the guests are sitting at their tables right now," Julianne pleaded, grabbing my forearm. Her grip was tight and desperate. "I have a staff of 20 servers waiting in the kitchen. I have 3 chefs standing by the carving stations. The prime rib is resting. The champagne is ready to be poured. But I cannot authorize my staff to serve a single plate of food or pour a single drop of alcohol until this balance is settled. My catering business is small, Sarah. I cannot absorb a $25,000 loss. If this bill is not paid tonight, I will not be able to make payroll on Monday. I will lose my business." I looked at her terrified face and felt a sickening surge of guilt. Julianne had worked tirelessly with me for months to design this custom menu. She did not deserve to be collateral damage in my father's desperate game of social climbing. "I will not let you lose your business," I told her firmly, forcing a sense of authority into my voice that I absolutely did not feel. "I promise you, Julianne, you will get every single penny you are owed tonight." She let out a shaky breath of relief, but the panic in her eyes remained. "So do you have a different card?" she asked. "Can you cover it right now?" I swallowed hard. The dry lump in my throat felt like sandpaper. I did not have $25,000 available on my personal credit cards. I had already pushed them to their absolute limits, paying for everything else. The only liquid cash I had left to my name was the emergency reserve sitting in the joint medical bank account I shared with my parents. The account where I deposited $2,500 every single month to keep my father alive. For the past 4 years, I had been funneling a massive portion of my salary into that joint account. My father had convinced me his heart condition required expensive out-of-pocket treatments, experimental medications, and frequent specialist visits that his insurance refused to cover. I had never questioned the cost. When someone you love is dying, you do not ask for itemized receipts. You just pay the bills and pray it buys them a few more years. According to my own meticulous spreadsheet tracking, there should be at least $40,000 sitting in that joint medical reserve right now. It was supposed to be the safety net for his next potential heart surgery. I hated the idea of touching that money to pay a catering bill. It felt reckless. It felt dangerous. But what other choice did I have? If I walked into that party tent and told my father his card had declined, he would have a public meltdown. The stress of the humiliation might literally trigger a fatal heart attack. If Preston's parents found out my father could not afford the food he was serving, the entire illusion of our wealthy, stable family would shatter instantly. My sister Chloe would never forgive me. My mother Diane would scream at me for ruining the aesthetic. And my father might collapse right there on the imported dance floor. "It has to be a medical lien," I mumbled, pacing the short length of the dusty garage floor. That is the only logical explanation. What Julianne asked, looking confused. My father's bank account. I explained, talking more to myself than to her. He has a lot of outstanding medical debt from his heart condition. Sometimes hospital billing departments or aggressive collection agencies will petition the court to place an automatic freeze or a lien on a bank account without prior notice. They must have swept his personal checking account for an unpaid medical bill right before the weekend. That is why his card declined for insufficient funds. The bank froze his assets. It is a ruthless collection tactic, but it happens all the time. I was using my professional knowledge to construct a logical, defensible narrative to explain this catastrophic financial failure. I desperately needed to believe my father was not a fraud. I needed to believe he was just a very sick man being targeted by a broken healthcare system. I was the financial professional of the family. It was my job to fix it. Julianne looked at her watch. The screen illuminated her pale face in the dark garage. "Sarah, we are completely out of time. The guests have been seated for 20 minutes. My servers are standing against the wall with pitchers of ice water, looking like fools. The kitchen needs a green light right now. Either you provide a valid payment method in the next 5 minutes, or I have to go into that tent, walk up to the microphone, and announce to your 150 guests that the dinner service has been canceled due to non-payment." The image of Julianne standing at the front of the lavish tent announcing our family bankruptcy to Preston's wealthy conservative parents sent a cold jolt of pure adrenaline through my veins. It would be the ultimate social execution. My parents would never recover. They would be the laughingstock of their church and our entire extended family. "Please do not do that, Julianne," I begged, holding up my hands in a gesture of surrender. "Please give me exactly 3 minutes. I have my work laptop in my heavy leather tote bag right here in the garage. I am the primary co-signer on the joint medical account with my parents. I have full legal authorization to initiate a wire transfer or issue an immediate digital payment from that fund. I will log in right now, figure out why his personal card was frozen, and I will authorize the $25,000 payment directly from the joint medical reserve." Julianne chewed her bottom lip, her eyes darting between me and the side door of the garage. 3 minutes, Sarah. I am not joking. If you do not have a confirmed transaction code for me in 3 minutes, I am pulling my staff and packing up the food trucks. I am so sorry, but I have to protect my livelihood. I know, I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. I know. Give me the 3 minutes. I dropped to my knees on the dusty concrete floor and unzipped my heavy leather work bag. I pulled out my silver laptop and rested it flat on the top of the plastic cooler. I opened the screen. The bright blue glow of the monitor illuminated the dust motes floating in the cold garage air. I quickly connected to my parents' home wireless network. I had set up their router 2 years ago, so the network password was already saved in my system settings. My fingers flew across the keyboard with the practiced muscle memory of someone who spent 60 hours a week staring at financial portals. I opened my secure web browser and navigated to the regional bank where our joint medical account was held. I typed in my administrator username. I typed in my complex password. I verified my identity through the 2-factor authentication code sent to my cell phone. I am logging in right now. I told Julianne, my eyes glued to the loading screen. I am going to check the available balance in the joint account. As soon as I confirm the funds are clear, I will process an immediate digital transfer to your merchant routing number. You will have your money. The party will go on. Everything is going to be fine. I kept repeating those words to myself. Everything is going to be fine. I was the good daughter. I was the reliable one. I was the invisible workhorse sitting on a dusty cooler in the dark, doing exactly what I had been trained to do. Fix their messes, carry their burdens, save them from the consequences of their own pride. The little loading circle on the bank portal spun round and round. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was fully prepared to see a massive medical deduction. I was fully prepared to see a zero balance on his personal checking account. I was fully prepared to transfer my hard-earned savings to cover the cost of crab cakes and top-shelf scotch, just so my father could look like a wealthy patriarch for one single night. Julianne leaned over my shoulder, her eyes scanning the glowing screen. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice trembling, "is the money there? Can you pay the bill?" I did not answer her. I could not answer her. The bank dashboard finally loaded, and the financial summaries populated on my screen. I did not see a medical lien. I did not see an automated hospital deduction. I did not see a bank error. Instead, I saw a transaction history that would completely destroy my understanding of who my parents really were. I saw the absolute truth. And that truth was about to turn me from a devoted, invisible daughter into the architect of their total destruction. The bright blue glow of the bank portal illuminated the dust motes floating in the freezing air of the detached garage. Julianne stood over my shoulder, shifting her weight from foot to foot, her breathing shallow and erratic. She was waiting for me to announce that the funds were clear. She was waiting for me to save her catering business. I kept my eyes locked on the laptop screen as the financial dashboard finally populated with my father's account summaries. As a certified public accountant, I look at financial ledgers the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray. I do not just see numbers. I see patterns. I see the flow of resources. I see the hidden architecture of a person's entire life. I was fully prepared to see the devastating architecture of a medical crisis. I was bracing myself to see aggressive hospital collections zeroed out, checking accounts and terrifying medical liens. I clicked on his personal checking account first. The balance displayed was $14.32. Then I clicked on the Premium Rewards credit card, the specific card he had tried to hand to Julianne for the $25,000 catering balance. The credit limit on the card was $80,000. The current balance was $80,000. The available credit was exactly zero. "Okay," I whispered to myself, keeping my voice steady. "The accounts are completely tapped out. Let us find the medical lien. Let us find out which hospital billing department froze his assets." I navigated to the recent transaction history for the Premium Rewards credit card. I downloaded the itemized statements for the past 12 months. I told myself I was about to see a heartbreaking list of specialized medical codes. I expected to see payments to Mercy Hospital, to regional cardiology clinics, to pharmaceutical companies and surgical centers. I expected to see the financial wreckage of a man fighting for his life. I opened the most recent statement and began to scroll down the list of merchant names. My eyes scanned the first row of transactions. There were no medical billing codes. There were no hospital networks. Instead, I saw a charge for $1,200 to a high-end luxury salon downtown. I saw a charge for $800 to an imported shoe boutique. I saw a recurring monthly charge of $2,000 to the Silver Pines Country Club. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, thinking the lack of sleep and the cold garage air were messing with my vision. I clicked on the previous month's statement. The pattern was identical. There was a charge for $4,500 to Delta Airlines, with the transaction details showing 2 first-class round-trip tickets to Aspen, Colorado. There was a charge for $3,000 to a luxury ski resort in the same town. There was a charge for $900 at a 5-star steakhouse. Sarah Julianne whispered, her voice cracking with mounting panic. "What is it? Why are you so quiet? Is the money there? Can you transfer the funds from the medical reserve?" I ignored her completely. My fingers were flying across the trackpad now, driven by a sudden sickening adrenaline. I opened a new tab on my browser and pulled up the transaction history for the Joint Medical Reserve account. That was the account I had legally co-signed. That was the account where I religiously deposited $2,500 on the first day of every single month for the past 4 years. I filtered the joint account ledger to track the outgoing transfers. I needed to see exactly where my hard-earned money had been going. The data loaded on the screen. The story it told was so clear and so incredibly cruel that I felt the breath leave my lungs. On November 12th, my father had called me sobbing. He told me his cardiologist had recommended a new experimental treatment series that his health insurance flatly refused to cover. He said it would cost $8,000 out of pocket just to start the program. I had transferred $8,000 from my personal savings into the joint medical account that very same afternoon. Now sitting in the freezing garage, I traced the exact path of that $8,000. The money sat in the joint account for less than 24 hours. On November 13th, my father transferred the exact amount of $8,000 from the joint medical reserve into his personal checking account. On November 14th, an electronic payment of $8,000 was made to his Premium Rewards credit card. I cross-referenced that exact date with the credit card statement. The $8,000 did not pay for an experimental heart treatment. It paid off the balance for the first-class tickets to Aspen and the luxury ski resort suite booked under my sister Chloe's name. I had funded her elite winter vacation while eating cheap instant noodles in my tiny apartment, thinking I was keeping my father alive. My hands began to tremble so violently that the laptop rattled against my knees. I scrolled further back into the records. On March 3rd, he told me he needed a specialized ambulatory heart monitor. The cost was $4,000. I had worked 3 weekends of overtime at the accounting firm to cover it. The transaction history showed that my $4,000 was swept into his personal checking account and then immediately paid to a designer bridal boutique in Manhattan. The merchant memo line literally read Chloe's custom veil and alterations. Then I saw the largest single transaction of the year. A $15,000 electronic transfer. The date was April 18th. That was the week my father told me he was considering a highly invasive valve surgery. He had sat in his armchair looking frail and exhausted and told me he needed to show the hospital a massive down payment just to secure a spot on the surgical waiting list. I had liquidated a portion of my meager retirement portfolio to get him that $15,000. I willingly paid the massive early withdrawal penalties and the capital gains taxes because I honestly thought I was saving his life. The ledger on the screen showed the absolute truth. The $15,000 transfer did not go to a hospital. It did not go to a surgical center. The merchant identification code belonged to the most exclusive luxury wedding venue in the state. The memo line was explicitly clear. It read non-refundable deposit for the wedding of Chloe and Preston. The blue light from the monitor reflected off my wide, unblinking eyes. Every single transaction was a perfectly documented betrayal. The new designer living room furniture my mother showed off last month was paid for by the money I sent for my father's imaginary prescription refills. The expensive highlights in Chloe's hair, the imported champagne they were drinking right now in the backyard tent, the tailored tuxedo my father was currently wearing to impress Preston's conservative family, it was all funded by my terror. They had weaponized my love for them. They knew I was the responsible, practical daughter. They knew I would sacrifice my own future, my own comfort, my own happiness to keep my father breathing. So they invented a terminal illness to turn me into their personal limitless ATM. Julianne grabbed my shoulder, shaking me slightly. "Sarah," she pleaded, her voice tight with absolute terror. "Please talk to me. Did they put a medical lien on the account? What is happening? My staff is going to walk out if I do not give them an update." I did not answer her. I could not speak. A strange, profound physical transformation was taking place inside my body. For the past 9 hours, I had been running around this property, sweating and hyperventilating, trying to make everything perfect for them. For the past 4 years, I had been living in a state of constant, terrifying anxiety, always waiting for the inevitable phone call that my father had died. My chest was always tight. My stomach was always in knots. I lived every single day of my life carrying the crushing, suffocating weight of my father's mortality on my shoulders. But as I stared at the glowing blue screen of the bank portal, all of that fear evaporated. It simply vanished. The tears that had been stinging my eyes completely dried up. The shivering in my arms stopped. The sorrow and humiliation of being banished to a dusty garage so I would not ruin the aesthetic melted away. It was replaced by absolute freezing clarity. My father was not dying. He did not have a failing heart. His flushed face and breathless complaints were not symptoms of cardiovascular disease. They were the symptoms of a man acting out a theatrical performance to steal from his own child. The exhaustion he claimed to feel was just the fatigue of maintaining a massive, intricate lie. I took a deep, slow breath. The damp smell of motor oil and cardboard filled my lungs, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually breathe. I was a certified public accountant. I dealt with facts. I dealt with audits. I dealt with people who tried to hide their financial crimes behind complex corporate structures. I had never expected to conduct a forensic audit on my own family, but now that I had the data, I knew exactly what I was looking at. This was not just poor financial management. This was systematic, calculated fraud. My parents had actively conspired with my golden child sister to drain my life savings. They sat around their expensive dining room table laughing over organic catered dinners while plotting how to extract my next bonus check. They told me I was the practical daughter, the one who did not need luxury, the one who was used to working hard. They framed my exploitation as a compliment to my resilience. I looked up from the screen and stared at the heavy wooden door of the garage. Through the gaps in the wood, I could hear the faint sound of my father laughing in the backyard tent. It was a booming, joyful, confident laugh. It was the laugh of a man who believed he had successfully manipulated everyone around him. He believed he had secured his status with Preston's wealthy church family. He believed he had thrown the perfect 35th anniversary gala. He believed his gullible, obedient workhorse of a daughter was sitting exactly where he put her, waiting in the dark until he decided she was allowed to come out. "Sarah," Julianne whispered, stepping back from me, her eyes wide. You look completely different. Are you okay?" I slowly turned my head to look at the caterer. My face felt completely numb. My posture, which had been slumped and defeated for the past 4 years, straightened automatically. "My father is not sick, Julianne," I said, my voice dropping to a low, calm register that echoed strangely in the empty garage. What Julianne blinked, looking completely derailed by the statement. "What do you mean, he's not sick?" "Sarah, we need to pay the catering bill. I do not understand what you are talking about." I looked back down at the laptop screen. I kept the tab open showing the $15,000 wedding deposit funded by my emergency medical withdrawal. I looked at the country club dues. I looked at the flights to Aspen. I processed the data not as a grieving daughter, but as a senior financial analyst uncovering a massive embezzlement scheme. "There are no medical liens on this account," I told her, my fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. His personal credit card declined because he maxed it out buying designer clothes, luxury vacations, and country club memberships for my sister. "He does not have $25,000 to pay you tonight, Julianne. He does not even have $25. My parents are completely broke. They have been funding their entire fake wealthy lifestyle by stealing my salary. Julianne covered her mouth with both hands, letting out a muffled gasp of horror. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God. Sarah, I am so sorry. But what does this mean for my business? What do I do?" The sorrow was gone. The panic was gone. I was sitting on a plastic cooler in a freezing garage wearing a cheap black dress, but I suddenly realized I was the most powerful person on this entire property. I held the keys to their entire fake empire. I controlled the joint accounts. I was the co-signer on the credit lines. I had the digital proof of their fraud right here on my screen. I looked at the remaining balance in the joint medical reserve. Because I had recently deposited my large annual corporate bonus, there was exactly $40,000 of my unspent money sitting in that account. That was the money they were planning to use to pay for my sister's upcoming wedding flowers and bridal shower. I rested my hands on the trackpad. "I am going to fix this, Julianne," I said, my voice cold and sharp as broken glass. "I am going to fix all of it." I kept my eyes locked on the laptop screen, showing my father's empty bank accounts, but my mind was spinning backward through time trying to connect the dots of a 15-year conspiracy. I needed to know how deep this lie actually went. Was it just my father acting out of some desperate, twisted pride to impress my sister's wealthy future in-laws? Or was it a coordinated effort? I needed to know if my mother Diane was aware that her new living room furniture was bought with my life savings. I needed to know if my sister Chloe understood that her first-class tickets to Aspen were paid for by my terrified 60-hour workweeks. I stood up from the plastic cooler, leaving the laptop open and glowing in the dark. The garage was freezing, but I did not feel the cold anymore. I felt entirely consumed by a burning, restless need for absolute proof. I looked around the dimly lit space. The walls were lined with towering stacks of heavy cardboard moving boxes and plastic storage bins. When my parents had remodeled the interior of the house last year, using money I now realized I had provided under the guise of an emergency hospital bill, I had been the one to carry all their discarded junk out here to the detached garage. My eyes scanned the handwritten labels on the cardboard boxes. Winter coats, holiday decorations, patio cushions. Then I saw it. A heavy plastic storage bin shoved into the corner with a strip of masking tape across the lid. My mother's neat cursive handwriting spelled out the words, "Old Office Electronics." A very specific memory surfaced in my mind with crystal clarity. 2 years ago, right around the time I liquidated a small stock portfolio to pay for my father's imaginary blood pressure medication, he had decided to upgrade his entire digital ecosystem. He bought himself a brand new premium laptop and a brand new tablet. He told me his old iPad was completely broken because the charging port was loose and the battery would not hold a charge. He had tossed it into a plastic bin and told me to haul it out to the garage so it would not clutter up his pristine home office. If that old iPad was still in that box, and if it still worked, it would be a digital goldmine. My father was incredibly lazy when it came to digital security. I knew for a fact he synced his text messages across all his Apple devices using his iCloud account. He liked being able to read his messages on a bigger screen while sitting in his leather armchair. If I could get that abandoned iPad to power on and connect to the wireless network I had just used for my laptop, it would automatically download his entire message history from the cloud server. I walked over to the corner of the garage, the gravel and dust crunching beneath my cheap black shoes. I grabbed the heavy plastic lid of the storage bin and ripped it off, tossing it to the floor. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Julianne asked, her voice trembling as she hovered near the cooler. She was clutching her electronic payment tablet like a life raft. "The guests are waiting. I need to tell the kitchen staff what to do." "Give me 2 minutes, Julianne," I said without looking back at her. I plunged my hands into the dusty plastic bin, digging through tangled extension cords, broken computer mice, and outdated keyboards. "I am gathering the rest of the evidence. I need to know exactly who I am dealing with before I walk back into that tent." My fingers brushed against a cold, flat piece of aluminum buried at the very bottom of the bin. I grabbed the edge and pulled it free from the mess of wires. It was the old iPad. The screen was covered in a thick layer of grime, and the top right corner of the glass was spiderwebbed with tiny cracks. I carried the dusty tablet back over to the plastic cooler and sat down next to my open work laptop. I pressed the power button on the side of the device. Nothing happened. The screen remained pitch black. The battery was completely dead, just as my father had claimed 2 years ago. But I was a corporate accountant who frequently worked long shifts in random hotel rooms and remote offices. I never traveled anywhere without a heavy-duty universal charging cable in my leather work bag. I unzipped the side pocket of my briefcase and pulled out the braided cord. I plugged the standard USB end directly into the side of my active laptop, drawing power from its massive battery. Then I took the small lightning connector and carefully wiggled it into the damaged charging port at the bottom of the old iPad. I held my breath, pressing the connection tight with my thumb to make sure the loose port maintained a solid electrical contact. For one long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. The garage was painfully quiet, save for the heavy sound of Julianne's panicked breathing and the distant, elegant music of the string quartet playing in the backyard. I stared at the dark rectangular screen, praying for a spark of life. I needed to see what they talked about when I was not in the room. I needed to know the truth. Suddenly, a faint white Apple logo appeared on the center of the cracked glass. The screen flickered, casting a pale, ghostly light across my face. It powered on. Because I had manually configured my parents' home wireless network years ago, the iPad instantly recognized the router signal broadcasting from the main house. It connected to the internet immediately. The small wireless fan icon appeared in the top corner of the screen. The moment the connection was established, the device emitted a sharp digital chime. Then another, and another. The iPad began to vibrate violently in my hands as a rapid-fire series of notifications flooded the lock screen. Ping after ping after ping echoed loudly in the quiet garage. 3 years of missed text messages, emails, and calendar alerts were syncing from the cloud server, downloading directly onto the outdated device in a chaotic digital avalanche. I waited a few seconds for the downloading frenzy to stabilize. Then I swiped my finger across the cracked glass to unlock the screen. There was no passcode. My father never bothered with passwords because he operated under the arrogant assumption that he was entirely untouchable. He believed he was the master of his domain and no one would ever dare look through his private property. I tapped the green messages icon on the home screen. The application opened, revealing a long list of recent text conversations. The very first thread at the top of the list, updated just moments ago, was a group chat. The participants were explicitly listed at the top of the screen: Diane and Chloe, my mother and my golden child sister. The chat was simply named Family. I stared at that word, family. I was not included in this group text. I had never been included in it. Whenever they needed to talk to me, they sent me direct individual messages, usually demanding technical support, asking me to run an errand, or telling me that my father's medical bills were due. But this thread was their private sanctuary. This was where the real family talked. I tapped the thread and opened the conversation. I started scrolling up, reading backward through the history of their daily interactions. It was a digital diary of their absolute contempt for me. I felt the last lingering shreds of my childhood innocence burn away as I read their casual, mundane exchanges. I saw a message from 3 weeks ago where Chloe complained bitterly about her wedding budget. She texted that the florist she wanted for the country club reception was demanding a $10,000 deposit, and Preston mother was going to judge her if she used cheaper flowers. My mother Diane had replied instantly, "Do not worry about the flowers, sweetie. Sarah is getting her corporate performance bonus at the end of the month. Your father is going to tell her that his new blood pressure medication is not covered by insurance and we need cash to pay the pharmacy. She will transfer the money to the joint account by Friday. You can book the expensive florist." Chloe had replied with 3 smiling heart emojis. "You guys are the best. I do not know what I would do without you." They were not even trying to hide it. They did not feel guilty. They did not feel ashamed. They discussed extracting my life savings with the same casual tone someone might use to discuss picking up groceries. I was not a daughter to them. I was a completely dehumanized resource. I was a naive, foolish workhorse who existed solely to fund their luxury and shield them from the consequences of their own vanity. My vision blurred, but I blinked the tears away rapidly. I was done crying. I scrolled all the way down to the very bottom of the thread, to the messages carrying today's date. The timestamps on the newest messages were from just 45 minutes ago. They were sent right around the exact time my father had grabbed my arm in the foyer and shoved me toward the laundry room. They were actively texting each other during the anniversary party while drinking champagne in the backyard tent. Chloe had sent a message at 7:15. "Did you hide Sarah yet? Preston parents are pulling up to the valet stand right now. His mother is wearing Chanel. If she sees Sarah sweating in that cheap, ugly dress, she's going to think we are trash. Please tell me Dad got rid of her." My mother Diane had replied exactly 1 minute later. "Your father put her in the garage. She is so gullible she will just sit out there in the dark and wait for permission to come back inside. I'm going to tell her that your dad's heart medication went up again next month so she feels bad and pays for your luxury bridal shower in Manhattan. Do not worry, sweetie. Your aesthetic is completely safe. Go mingle with Preston family and show off that ring." I read the exact words over and over again, letting them burn themselves into my memory. Hide Sarah. She is so gullible. Your aesthetic is safe. The sheer casual cruelty of my mother typing those words while surrounded by white orchids I had paid for was breathtaking. It solidified the ice in my veins. My father was not acting alone. He was not just a desperate, proud man trying to keep up appearances for his future son-in-law. This was a fully coordinated family effort to bleed me dry and keep me hidden in the shadows. My mother was the architect. My sister was the willing beneficiary. And my father was the enforcer. I had spent my entire adult life trying to earn their love by being useful. I thought if I just solved enough problems, if I just paid enough bills, if I just sacrificed enough of my own happiness, they would finally look at me the way they looked at Chloe. I thought they would eventually see my value. Sitting in the freezing garage, I finally understood the truth. They already knew my value. They valued my bank account. They valued my obedience. They valued my gullibility. But they did not value me as a human being. I placed the cracked iPad gently down on the plastic cooler right next to my open work laptop. I looked at the two glowing screens side by side. On the left screen, the empty banking portal displaying the absolute proof of their massive financial fraud. On the right screen, the digital proof of their profound emotional depravity. Together, those two screens contained the power to destroy the fake, flawless empire my parents had spent 35 years building. I stared at the glowing text messages. The silence in the garage stretched on heavy and thick. I did not feel small anymore. I did not feel like the sweaty, disheveled staff member banished to the outbuildings. The fear of my father dying, the desperation for my mother's approval, the jealousy of my sisters, golden status, it was all completely gone. A sharp, loud knock on the plastic cooler brought me abruptly back to the present moment. Sarah Julianne said, her voice shaking with intense urgency. She was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. "I am so sorry to push you, but my catering captain just texted me from the staging area. The guests are sitting at the tables with empty plates. Preston family is waiting for the first course to be served. The string quartet is about to take their break. The entire party is stalling." Julianne took a ragged breath, clutching her tablet. "What do we do, Sarah? Should I tell the servers to start plating the salads? Or do we pack up the trucks and cancel everything? I need a decision right now." I looked up from the glowing screens and met Julianne's panicked gaze. I realized in that exact moment that the power dynamic of my entire life had just violently inverted. For 32 years, I had believed I was the dependent one. I thought I was the boring, plain, practical daughter who had to constantly earn her place at the table by serving the beautiful, important people. My parents had convinced me that I was lucky they allowed me to be part of their lives. But looking at the bank accounts and the text messages, I realized the absolute reality of the situation. I was the only person on this entire property with actual power. I was the one who funded the tent. I was the one who paid for the flowers. I was the one whose signature controlled the joint accounts. Without my money, without my silent compliance, and without my constant, desperate need for their approval, my parents were nothing. They were just broke frauds, wearing rented clothes standing in a backyard they could no longer afford, trying to impress people who would despise them if they knew the truth. "I hold the keys," I whispered into the cold air of the garage, the realization washing over me like a wave of pure electricity. "I hold the keys to the whole damn thing." I did not scream. I did not throw the cracked iPad across the dusty concrete floor of the detached garage. For the past 4 years, I had operated under a heavy, suffocating cloud of constant emotional terror, genuinely believing my father was slowly dying of a complex heart condition. But right now, in this freezing space, smelling of damp cardboard and stale motor oil, all of that panic completely evaporated. It was instantly replaced by the absolute cold clinical precision of a senior certified public accountant. I was no longer a terrified daughter trying to save her family from medical bankruptcy. I was a professional financial auditor discovering a massive coordinated embezzlement scheme, and I knew exactly how to shut it down. I turned my attention back to my silver work laptop resting on the dusty lid of the plastic cooler. The blue light from the screen illuminated the dark corners of the garage. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I looked at the Joint Medical Reserve account dashboard. The available balance displayed on the screen was exactly $40,000. This was my money. This was the money I had painstakingly deposited just last week from my annual corporate performance bonus. My parents were fully planning to drain this cash by Monday morning to pay for my sister Chloe and her luxury bridal shower, her custom floral arrangements, and her designer wedding dress. They thought I was a gullible, obedient workhorse who would simply transfer more funds when they demanded it. They were wrong. I clicked on the Transfer Funds tab, navigating the secure banking portal with practiced muscle memory. I selected the joint medical account as the origin point for the transaction. I then selected my private individual checking account at a completely different banking institution as the secure destination. I typed the number 40,000 into the transfer amount box. I did not hesitate for a single second. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt or hesitation. My parents had forfeited any right to my financial support the moment they called me a disposable aesthetic problem in their group chat. I moved my cursor over the final submission button and clicked confirm. A bright green check mark appeared on the screen accompanied by a confirmation tracking number. The joint account balance instantly dropped to absolute zero. The money was safe. It was finally mine again. But I was not finished. Transferring my unspent cash was just the beginning of the process. I needed to completely sever my financial existence from their fake empire, ensuring they could never steal from me again. I navigated back to the main banking dashboard and located the Mortgage and Loan Services tab. 2 years ago, my father had told me the hospital was demanding a massive upfront payment for a potential highly invasive heart valve replacement surgery. He said he needed to take out a home equity line of credit on their suburban house to cover the astronomical costs, but his credit score was supposedly too low because of his outstanding medical debts. He had sat in his armchair crying, begging me to act as a primary guarantor on the loan to save his life. I had signed the extensive digital paperwork without reading the fine print, because I genuinely thought I was saving my father from a fatal heart attack. Now, sitting in the cold garage, I clicked on the Loan Services portal and opened the home equity line of credit details. The account was completely maxed out. They had borrowed heavily against the equity of their own home not to pay for specialized heart surgeons, but to fund expensive designer clothes, imported furniture, and exclusive country club memberships. Because I was the primary financial guarantor who had originally set up the digital access for the loan, I retained the highest level of administrative power over the account structure. I quickly navigated to the security settings of the loan portal. I read through the terms of service identifying the specific legal loophole that allows a guarantor to unilaterally freeze a credit line to prevent further financial liability. I initiated a hard security freeze on the entire equity line. I downloaded the necessary administrative forms, digitally signed them, and submitted an official request to remove my name as a guarantor from their future liabilities. I clicked Submit and watched the portal lock the credit line entirely. The status changed from active to frozen. My parents would not be able to borrow another single cent against that house. Their endless supply of borrowed luxury was officially cut off. Next, I moved my cursor to the credit card management portal. Over the past 4 years, I had authorized my parents as authorized secondary users on 3 of my premium corporate and personal credit cards. I had originally done this so my mother could quickly pay for emergency prescriptions, sudden ambulance copays, or urgent specialist visits. If I was stuck working late at the accounting firm, I clicked on the transaction history for those specific authorized cards. The recent charges were sickening. They were entirely from high-end steakhouses, luxury boutiques, premium day spas, and expensive resort hotels. They had been drinking imported wine and getting hot stone massages on my credit while I was eating instant ramen in my tiny apartment, trying to save every penny for them. I clicked on the Card Management tab. I selected my father's authorized card profile. I clicked the button to lock the card permanently. A warning popped up asking if I was sure. I clicked Yes. I selected my mother's authorized card profile. I clicked Lock Permanently. Then I navigated to the Fraud and Security Center and reported both authorized cards as lost and compromised, requesting the bank to immediately cancel the account numbers and issue no replacements. The screen refreshed, showing that all authorized user access had been successfully revoked. In less than 15 minutes of focused silent work, I had completely dismantled the financial engine that powered their extravagant lies. They had no cash. They had no credit. They had no equity. They were utterly and entirely bankrupt. During this entire methodical process, Julianne had been standing right next to me in the dark garage. The owner of the luxury catering company was shifting her weight nervously from foot to foot, clutching her electronic payment tablet tightly against her chest. She was watching my face, waiting for me to magically save her business. The sounds of the massive anniversary party continued to drift through the thin wooden garage walls. I could hear the string quartet playing a bright, joyful classical melody. I could hear the loud, confident laughter of my father entertaining Preston and his wealthy conservative parents. They were sitting in that massive, elegant white tent, expecting a 5-star dinner service, expecting to be treated like absolute royalty on my dime. I slowly closed my silver laptop. The glowing blue light vanished, plunging the garage back into the dim, lonely shadows of the single overhead light bulb. I placed my laptop carefully into my heavy leather briefcase and zipped it securely shut. I stood up from the plastic cooler, straightening my plain black dress, and turned to face the caterer. Julianne stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. She looked at my empty hands. She looked at my closed briefcase. She realized I was not holding a new credit card. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute panic. "What is happening? Did you transfer the money from the medical account? Can I process the final payment right now? My staff is waiting for the signal to start plating the food. The guests are getting restless. Preston's family is looking toward the kitchen." I looked at her with complete, unshakable calm. I had spent 6 months working closely with Julianne to plan this event. I knew she was a hard-working small business owner who poured her heart and soul into her culinary events. She did not deserve to be financially ruined by my parents' elaborate fraud. But I was not going to pay for this party. I was not going to subsidize one more second of their elaborate, sickening lie. "Julianne," I said, my voice steady and quiet in the cold air, "I am not going to give you a new credit card. I am not going to authorize a wire transfer. My father does not have the money to pay you, and I am no longer funding this family." Julianne's face went completely chalk white. She took a staggering step back, bumping hard into a stack of cardboard moving boxes. "Oh my God," she gasped, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped her electronic tablet. "Oh my God, Sarah, you cannot do this to me. I have thousands of dollars of premium food sitting in that kitchen area. I have 20 staff members on the clock earning hourly wages. If you do not pay this invoice, my catering company will go bankrupt by Monday. I will lose everything I have built. Please, Sarah, you promised me you would fix this. You told me you would fix this. I stepped closer to her, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my expression entirely neutral. I am fixing this, Julianne, I told her, looking directly into her panicked eyes. I am stopping the fraud right now. I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are not going to lose your business tonight. As a certified public accountant, I am telling you exactly what your legal rights are in this situation. Because the client fundamentally failed to provide the required final payment before the dinner service began, you are entirely within your legal rights under your standard vendor contract to repossess all goods and immediately halt all services. I paused, letting the legal reality sink into her mind. You still own that food, Julianne. You still own the alcohol. You can pack it all up, load it safely into your refrigerated trucks, and use it for your corporate catering events tomorrow. The prime rib, the caviar, the champagne, it all still belongs to you. You will absolutely recover your costs and make your payroll. You just cannot serve it here tonight. But the guests, she stammered, pointing a trembling finger toward the side door of the garage. The guests are sitting at the beautifully decorated tables. The VIPs are waiting for their expensive dinner. If we pack up the food, they will have absolutely nothing to eat. Your father will be completely humiliated in front of everyone. It will be an absolute massive scandal. I looked toward the garage door, listening to the distant sound of my father's booming, arrogant laughter carrying across the manicured lawn. That is exactly the point, Julianne, I said coldly. I reached out and gently placed my hand on her shoulder to steady her. She was vibrating with sheer nervous energy. I need you to go back into that kitchen area right now, I instructed her, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate or hesitation. I need you to tell your executive chefs to stop plating the salads immediately. I need you to tell your servers to gather their trays and return to the staging area. You are going to cancel the entire food service. You are going to pack up the prime rib, the caviar, the expensive champagne, and every single piece of rented silverware. You are going to load everything back into your trucks as quickly and quietly as possible. Julianne stared at me, her mouth slightly open, trying desperately to process the magnitude of what I was demanding she do. You want me to leave 150 high-profile guests sitting in a luxury tent with absolutely nothing, she whispered, sounding completely stunned. Yes, I said simply. Cancel the food. Pack it all up. Leave nothing behind. She swallowed hard, looking down at the red declined error message on her tablet, and then back up at my face. She saw the absolute, unwavering determination in my eyes. She realized I was completely serious, and that this was the only way she was going to save her small business from my parents' financial ruin. Okay, she said, her voice barely more than a breath in the freezing garage. Okay, I will go tell the staff to pack up the kitchen. We will start breaking down the catering staging area right now. She turned to walk toward the side door, her crisp black uniform blending into the dark shadows of the garage. Wait, I called out, stopping her before she could turn the brass doorknob. She looked back over her shoulder, her eyes wide with apprehension, wondering what else I could possibly demand of her on this chaotic night. When you break down the staging area and pull your catering equipment out of the main party tent, I said, my voice dropping to a low, hard register that carried a promise of absolute destruction. I need you to leave two very specific things behind. Do not touch the wireless microphone resting on the main stage, and do not touch the audio-visual projector I set up near the back tables. Julianne blinked, looking completely confused by the strange request. The microphone and the projector, she repeated slowly. Why do you need those, Sarah? We are packing up the entire party. Everyone is going to leave. Because the party is over, I told her, picking up my heavy leather briefcase from the plastic cooler and gripping the handle tightly. But the presentation is just about to begin. Julianne slipped out of the heavy side door of the garage, leaving me completely alone in the freezing shadows. The latch clicked shut, sealing me inside the cold, damp space. I walked slowly over to the small, grimy window that looked out over the sprawling, manicured backyard. Through the smudged glass, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the massive white party tent. It was an absolute masterpiece of suburban illusion. Sparkling crystal chandeliers hung from the draped canvas ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over the 150 guests. I watched the wealthy attendees dressed in designer suits and expensive evening gowns laughing and talking, completely oblivious to the financial apocalypse that was quietly unfolding just a few yards away from their tables. Behind the main tent in the dimly lit staging area, I could see Julianne moving with frantic, silent efficiency. She was waving her arms aggressively, directing her staff of 20 servers and 3 executive chefs. They moved like ghosts in the night, perfectly trained to avoid making a scene. I watched as they rapidly pulled the silver warming trays off the serving tables. I watched them load the premium prime rib, the imported caviar, and the expensive artisan cheeses back into the heavy, insulated transport carriers. I saw servers quietly rolling away tall metal carts, loaded with unopened bottles of top-shelf scotch and expensive vintage champagne. They were systematically dismantling the feast my father had promised to Preston and his wealthy conservative parents. The guests inside the tent were still sipping their initial glasses of iced water, completely unaware that their 5-star dinner service was currently being loaded into the back of refrigerated commercial catering trucks. The sheer surrealism of the scene made my heart pound with a strange, dark thrill. For my entire life, my parents had prioritized appearances over reality. They had happily sacrificed my future, my happiness and my financial security, just to maintain this fragile, shimmering illusion of immense wealth. And now, standing in the dark, smelling the stale motor oil, I was watching that illusion physically vanish into the night air. But pulling the expensive food was only the very first step of my plan. Taking away their feast would merely embarrass them for a single evening. It would allow my father to smoothly spin a lie about incompetent caterers or terrible vendor mistakes. He would play the victim. He would apologize profusely to Preston parents and promise to take them out for an extravagant dinner at a private club the following night to make up for the inconvenience. I could not let that happen. I needed to ensure that the truth was so visible, so absolute, and so undeniably public that no amount of smooth talking could ever erase the stain of their fraud. I walked back to the plastic cooler and sat down, opening my heavy silver work laptop once again. I was the one who had purchased and installed the entire wireless network infrastructure for this massive house 2 years ago. I knew every single digital pathway, every security protocol, and every linked device on the entire property. When the high-end audio-visual company had arrived yesterday afternoon to set up the staging for the anniversary gala, I had been the one to help them connect their digital projector to the main home network so my father could play a romantic slideshow of his 35-year marriage later in the evening. My fingers moved across the keyboard with cold, clinical precision. I accessed the master router administration panel and scanned the long list of connected wireless devices. There it was. The high-definition digital projector suspended from the ceiling of the main party tent. I bypassed the standard user interface and established a direct remote administrative connection between my laptop in the cold garage and the projector hanging in the warm tent. A small green notification popped up on my screen, confirming that my laptop was now the primary source for the visual display. Whatever I chose to put on my computer screen right now would be instantly broadcast onto the massive 12-foot white canvas mounted at the front of the party tent. I opened a blank digital presentation file. The stark white screen glared back at me, waiting to be filled with evidence. I was no longer preparing tax documents or corporate audits for faceless clients. I was building a digital guillotine, and I was going to use it to execute the fake empire my parents had constructed on my broken back. I started with the absolute foundation of their lie. I navigated back to the secure banking portal and opened the transaction history for the joint medical reserve account. I took a high-resolution screenshot of the incoming transfer ledger. I cropped the image perfectly, ensuring my name, the dates, and the exact dollar amounts were crystal clear. I pasted this image onto the very first slide of the blank presentation. I added a simple bold text header at the top of the slide in massive black font. It read, "Sarah's monthly medical deposits." I wanted the entire room to see the absolute relentless consistency of my personal sacrifice. I wanted Preston conservative parents to see the neat rows and rows of $2,500 deposits stretching back for 48 consecutive months. I wanted every single guest to calculate the math in their heads and realize that the plain sweaty daughter who had been banished to the garage had systematically surrendered over $120,000 of her own hard-earned money. I wanted everyone in that luxurious tent to see the financial blood I had bled to keep a supposedly dying man alive. The numbers told a heartbreaking story of desperate, unconditional love. It was a story of a terrified daughter who gave everything she had because she believed her family needed her to survive. Then I created the second slide. I titled it, The Reality of Richard Medical Expenses. I went back to the downloaded credit card statements and the personal checking account ledgers. I began taking rapid screenshots of every single luxury purchase they had made using my stolen funds. I pasted the image of the $4,500 charge to Delta Airlines for the first-class flights to Aspen, Colorado. I pasted the receipt for the $3,000 luxury ski resort suite booked explicitly under my sister Chloe's name. I took a screenshot of the $2,000 recurring monthly payments to the Silver Pines Country Club. I arranged the digital images on the slide, creating a horrifying collage of their extreme vanity. I made sure to highlight the dates of the purchases, showing exactly how they aligned perfectly with the exact days I deposited my emergency medical funds. I placed a bright red digital box around the massive $15,000 transaction to the exclusive wedding venue. The memo line reading non-refundable deposit for the wedding of Chloe and Preston was magnified so large that even the guests sitting in the very back row of the tent would be able to read it with absolute clarity. I stared at the second slide, feeling a cold knot of righteous anger hardening deep in my chest. This slide single-handedly dismantled their entire carefully curated public persona. It proved that the elegant anniversary party, the designer clothes, and the expensive engagement ring were all built on a foundation of grotesque financial abuse. It proved that my father was not a wealthy, successful patriarch, providing for his beloved family, but a parasitic fraud who intentionally stole from his own child to buy his way into high society. But financial fraud was simply not enough. Money could be explained away by desperate people. My mother could claim they were just borrowing it and planning to pay me back. My father could claim it was a terrible misunderstanding about account routing numbers. I needed to expose the emotional depravity underlying the theft. I needed Preston family to see exactly how toxic the people they were about to marry into truly were. I created the third and final slide. I turned to the cracked iPad sitting next to me on the dusty cooler. The screen was still glowing brightly, showing the cruel group text messages between my mother Diane and my sister Chloe. I took a direct photograph of the iPad screen using my laptop camera, ensuring the timestamps and the sender names were perfectly visible and undeniable. I imported the high-resolution image onto the third slide. I did not add a title to this slide. The vicious words spoke entirely for themselves. I magnified the specific message from Chloe asking if they had hidden me yet, so I would not ruin their delicate aesthetic. I magnified my mother's cruel response, calling me a gullible workhorse who would just sit in the dark garage and wait patiently for permission to exist. I magnified the exact sentence where my mother gleefully planned to lie to me about my father's blood pressure medication increasing in price, so she could steal my upcoming corporate bonus check for Chloe Luxury bridal shower in Manhattan. The text messages were stark black bubbles against a bright white background. They were undeniably real. They captured the absolute essence of my parents' cruelty. They proved that my family viewed my love and devotion not as a gift, but as a weakness to be endlessly and ruthlessly exploited. By putting these messages on a 12-foot screen, I was stripping away every ounce of their fake charm and exposing the ugly, rotting core of their true characters to the very people they were so desperate to impress. I reviewed the 3 slides one by one. Slide 1, the endless sacrifice. Slide 2, the greedy theft. Slide 3, the emotional betrayal. It was a flawless, airtight presentation. There were no loopholes. There was no room for misinterpretation or excuses. It was the absolute, undeniable truth formatted with the cold, hard logic of a professional financial audit. I closed the presentation editor and queued up the slideshow on the broadcasting application. The remote connection to the projector in the main tent was highly stable and active. I minimized the window, leaving my laptop screen showing a simple black background so the projector in the tent would currently just display a blank dark square above the stage. I stood up from the plastic cooler, leaving my laptop open and connected. I walked slowly back over to the grimy garage window and peered through the smudged glass one more time. The caterers were completely gone. The staging area behind the tent was entirely empty and dark. There were no warming ovens, no silver trays, and no servers standing by the entrance. Julianne had executed my instructions perfectly to save her business. The feast had vanished into the night without a single sound. Inside the massive white tent, the 150 guests were starting to shift uncomfortably in their padded wooden chairs. I watched Preston, wealthy conservative mother, lean over and whisper something to his father, glancing with mild annoyance toward the empty kitchen entrance. The string quartet had stopped playing and were packing their instruments. The atmosphere in the beautiful tent was growing increasingly tense and confused. Then I saw my father stand up from his seat at the center VIP table. He was wearing his custom-tailored tuxedo, smiling broadly as if everything in the world was going exactly according to his brilliant plan. He did not know the premium food was gone. He did not know his credit card had hard declined. He did not know I had permanently frozen his entire financial existence. He picked up a crystal champagne glass and tapped the side of it with a silver spoon. The sharp chiming sound carried across the quiet backyard, echoing through the thin walls of the garage. The guests in the tent immediately turned their attention toward him, falling into a polite, expectant silence. My mother Diane stood up next to him, beaming with practiced artificial grace, holding her own glass. My sister Chloe rested her perfectly styled head on Preston's shoulder, playing the role of the perfect glowing fiancé. Through the glass, I watched my father raise his glass high into the air, preparing to deliver a boastful, arrogant toast to his 35 years of marriage and his highly successful, wealthy life. He was preparing to welcome Preston's prestigious family into our home, cementing his elite status and sealing his golden child's future. I stepped away from the window. The freezing air of the garage no longer bothered me at all. I walked over to the plastic cooler and picked up my heavy leather work briefcase. I brushed the thick layer of gray garage dust off the skirt of my plain black dress, smoothing the inexpensive fabric with deliberate, calm hands. I was no longer the sweaty, disheveled hired help hiding in the shadows, waiting for scraps of affection. I was the architect of their impending destruction. I reached out and grabbed the cold brass handle of the heavy wooden garage door. I took one final deep breath, filling my lungs with the damp scent of motor oil and earth. Then I pushed the door open and stepped out into the night, ready to burn their fake empire to the ground. The cool night air washed over my face as I stepped out of the detached garage. The crunch of gravel beneath my cheap black shoes sounded incredibly loud in the quiet darkness of the side yard. I gripped the handle of my heavy leather briefcase, carrying my silver laptop inside it. I walked slowly but with a sense of absolute purpose. Every step carried me further away from the terrified, obedient daughter I had been for 32 years and closer to the woman who was finally going to set herself free. I approached the massive white party tent from the rear entrance. The canvas walls glowed warmly from the bright crystal chandeliers hanging inside. As I slipped through the draped opening, I immediately noticed the heavy, awkward tension hanging over the room. The atmosphere was completely different from the joyful celebration my parents had envisioned. 150 guests were seated at 15 round tables covered in pristine white silk tablecloths. The floral centerpieces I had paid for towered above them, but the tables were entirely empty of food. There were no bread baskets. There were no butter dishes. There were no salads. The elegant silver charger plates sat completely bare. The guests were shifting uncomfortably in their padded wooden chairs. I watched prominent members of our community discreetly checking their watches. I saw wealthy neighbors casting confused glances toward the empty kitchen staging area. At the front of the room sat the VIP table. Preston and his family occupied the best seats in the house, Preston's father was a highly traditional conservative man who expected events to run with absolute military precision. He was sitting with his arms crossed tightly over his chest, staring at his empty water glass with a deep frown. Preston's mother was whispering something to him, her posture stiff and irritated. My sister Chloe sat next to Preston, wearing a custom designer gown, playing with her engagement ring, and looking nervously toward the catering entrance. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her luxury dinner was currently driving away down the interstate in the back of refrigerated trucks. At the very center of the stage stood my father, Richard. He was bathed in a warm spotlight, holding a crystal champagne glass in one hand and a wireless microphone in the other. He was completely ignoring the uncomfortable, hungry silence of his guests. He was lost in the sound of his own voice, projecting the ultimate image of a successful, wealthy patriarch. 35 years ago, I stood at an altar and promised to provide for my beautiful wife, Diane. He projected his booming voice, filling the massive tent. I promised to build a legacy. It was not always easy. Building a successful life requires immense sacrifice, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to traditional family values. But looking around this magnificent room tonight, I can proudly say I kept that promise. I built an empire to support the people I love. I stood motionless in the shadows near the entrance, listening to his sickening lies. He was literally wearing a tailored tuxedo funded by my stolen medical deposits while bragging about his hard work. But my greatest achievement is not financial, he continued, gesturing grandly toward the VIP table. My greatest achievement is sitting right there. My beautiful daughter, Chloe. The crowd offered a polite, muted round of applause. Chloe beamed, flashing a perfect practice smile. Chloe, you have always been the light of our home, my father said, his voice dripping with artificial emotion. You have carried yourself with such grace, such purity, and such elegance. You represent the very best of this family. And Preston, we are so incredibly thrilled to welcome you into our fold. Your parents have raised an outstanding young man. Our families share the exact same values. We believe in hard work, we believe in integrity, and we believe that true wealth is measured by the quality of the legacy we leave behind for our children. I felt a cold, sharp smile touch the corners of my mouth. Integrity. He was lecturing a room full of people about integrity while he was completely bankrupt and actively stealing from his other child. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime. That was when my mother, Diane, spotted me. She was standing near the edge of the stage wearing a stunning imported silk gown. She had been scanning the crowd, making sure everyone was paying proper attention to my father's speech. Her eyes swept past the back tables and landed directly on me. I was standing near the drapery holding my heavy briefcase. My plain black dress was wrinkled. My hair was messy from sweating in the sun all morning. My face was streaked with gray dust from the garage. I did not look like I belonged in this room of designer suits and expensive jewelry. My mother's face went entirely rigid. Her eyes widened in absolute horror. She glanced frantically toward Preston's parents to see if they had noticed me standing in the shadows. When she saw they were still looking at my father, she let out a visible breath. She immediately began moving toward me, navigating through the maze of tables with rapid, aggressive strides. She reached the back of the tent and grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging painfully into my skin. "Sarah, what in the world are you doing in here?" She hissed, her voice a venomous, panicked whisper. "Your father told you specifically to stay in the garage. Look at you. You are covered in dirt. You look absolutely disgusting. You are going to humiliate us in front of Preston's family." I did not pull my arm away. I simply looked down at her hand and then up into her furious blue eyes. "I am not going back to the garage, Diane," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and low. My mother blinked, completely taken aback by my tone and my use of her first name. She had never heard me speak to her without total submission. "Excuse me," she whispered, her eyes flashing with rage. "You will do exactly as you are told. You are going to walk out that door right now before anyone important sees you. We have spent months curating this event, and I will not let you ruin it. Get back outside." I did not move a single muscle. I stood my ground staring at her with cold, blank eyes. My refusal to obey her silent, frantic commands caught the attention of the people sitting at the back tables. A few guests turned around to look at the commotion. The sudden movement caught my father's eye from the stage. Richard paused his grand speech. He looked over the heads of the crowd and saw my mother struggling to push me back toward the exit. He saw my messy hair and my dusty dress. He saw the exact aesthetic nightmare he had tried so hard to prevent. Instead of ignoring the situation, my father decided to use his ultimate weapon, public humiliation. He believed that if he shamed me in front of 150 people, I would shrink back into my obedient, subservient role and run away in tears. He raised the microphone back to his mouth and let out a loud, booming, patronizing laugh. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like our behind-the-scenes helper has wandered out of the staging area," my father announced to the entire tent. The guests shifted in their seats, turning around to look at me. Preston's parents frowned, staring at my dusty appearance with obvious judgment. Chloe covered her face with her hands, shaking her head in theatrical embarrassment. "Sarah, honey," my father continued, his voice dripping with condescension and fake warmth. "We appreciate all your hard work moving the chairs and dealing with the trash today. We really do. But the adults are trying to celebrate right now. Why do you not go back to the garage and let the caterers handle the rest of the evening? You do not want to ruin the aesthetic of the party now, do you?" A few people in the crowd chuckled softly, assuming it was a light-hearted family joke. My mother glared at me, a smug, victorious smirk forming on her lips. She thought he had won. She thought the sheer weight of the public embarrassment would crush me. But she did not know what I had seen on that cracked iPad. She did not know what I had downloaded onto my silver laptop. I did not shrink. I did not cry. I did not run out the door. I looked directly at my father standing on that brightly lit stage. Then I gently but firmly pried my mother's fingers off my arm, pushing her hand away. I gripped my leather briefcase and stepped completely out of the shadows and into the bright light of the crystal chandeliers. I began walking straight down the center aisle of the party tent. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, measured, confident pace of a senior financial analyst entering a boardroom. My cheap black shoes clicked against the temporary wooden flooring. I passed table after table of confused, wealthy guests. I passed my mother, who was standing frozen in shock, completely paralyzed by my blatant defiance. "What is she doing?" my mother whispered loudly, her voice cracking with sudden panic. "Sarah, stop. Sarah, get back here right now." I ignored her. I kept my eyes focused entirely on the front of the room. I walked past the VIP table. I felt Chloe's furious glare burning into the side of my face. I saw Preston's highly religious father narrow his eyes, staring at me with deep disapproval. I did not care. Their opinions meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. I approached the audio-visual control table located just to the right of the main stage. A young technician wearing a black polo shirt was sitting behind a complex soundboard and a video mixing console. He looked up at me completely bewildered as I marched into his workspace. "Excuse me, miss, you cannot be back here," the technician said, standing up quickly. "This equipment is for the presentation." I set my heavy leather briefcase down on the table with a loud, solid thud. "I am the one who hired you," I told him, my voice cold and commanding. "I am Sarah, the financial guarantor for this entire event. Step aside." The technician looked at my stern expression, then looked up at my father on the stage, who was watching the scene unfold with growing confusion and anger. The technician swallowed hard and took a slow step back away from the console. My father lowered his champagne glass. The booming fake warmth completely vanished from his face, replaced by a dark, threatening scowl. "Sarah," he hissed into the microphone, his voice echoing loudly through the silent tent. "What do you think you are doing? I told you to go outside. Get away from that equipment immediately." I did not look at him. I reached down and unzipped my leather briefcase. I pulled out my silver laptop, the device that was already remotely connected to the massive digital projector suspended from the ceiling. I opened the screen. The blue light washed over my face. I quickly bypassed the lock screen and minimized the background windows. The presentation I had built in the freezing garage was sitting right there perfectly cued and ready to launch. I reached across the soundboard and picked up the secondary wireless microphone resting next to the mixing console. I flicked the power switch on. A sharp electronic hum signaled that the microphone was live and connected to the main speaker system. I turned my back to my father. I turned my back to my mother, who was practically running down the center aisle toward the stage. I stepped away from the audiovisual table and walked to the very center of the dance floor, positioning myself directly between my father on the stage and the VIP table where Preston and his wealthy conservative parents were seated. I stood incredibly tall, ignoring the dust on my dress and the sweat on my neck. I raised the microphone to my mouth. I locked my eyes directly onto Preston's father, making absolute unwavering eye contact with the man my parents had destroyed my life to impress. The tent was dead silent. 150 people were holding their breath, waiting to see what the messy, disheveled daughter was about to do. I held the microphone tightly, knowing that the very next words I spoke would burn this fake, flawless empire to the ground. The cool night air washed over my face as I stepped out of the detached garage. The crunch of gravel beneath my cheap black shoes sounded incredibly loud in the quiet darkness of the side yard. I gripped the handle of my heavy leather briefcase, carrying my silver laptop inside it. I walked slowly but with a sense of absolute purpose. Every step carried me further away from the terrified, obedient daughter I had been for 32 years and closer to the woman who was finally going to set herself free. I approached the massive white party tent from the rear entrance. The canvas walls glowed warmly from the bright crystal chandeliers hanging inside. As I slipped through the draped opening, I immediately noticed the heavy, awkward tension hanging over the room. The atmosphere was completely different from the joyful celebration my parents had envisioned. 150 guests were seated at 15 round tables covered in pristine white silk tablecloths. The floral centerpieces I had paid for towered above them. But the tables were entirely empty of food. There were no bread baskets. There were no butter dishes. There were no salads. The elegant silver charger plates sat completely bare. The guests were shifting uncomfortably in their padded wooden chairs. I watched prominent members of our community discreetly checking their watches. I saw wealthy neighbors casting confused glances toward the empty kitchen staging area. At the front of the room sat the VIP table. Preston and his family occupied the best seats in the house. Preston's father was a highly traditional conservative man who expected events to run with absolute military precision. He was sitting with his arms crossed tightly over his chest, staring at his empty water glass with a deep frown. Preston's mother was whispering something to him, her posture stiff and irritated. My sister Chloe sat next to Preston, wearing a custom designer gown, playing with her engagement ring, and looking nervously toward the catering entrance. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her luxury dinner was currently driving away down the interstate in the back of refrigerated trucks. At the very center of the stage stood my father, Richard. He was bathed in a warm spotlight, holding a crystal champagne glass in one hand and a wireless microphone in the other. He was completely ignoring the uncomfortable, hungry silence of his guests. He was lost in the sound of his own voice, projecting the ultimate image of a successful, wealthy patriarch. 35 years ago, I stood at an altar and promised to provide for my beautiful wife, Diane. He projected his booming voice, filling the massive tent. I promised to build a legacy. It was not always easy. Building a successful life requires immense sacrifice, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to traditional family values. But looking around this magnificent room tonight, I can proudly say I kept that promise. I built an empire to support the people I love. I stood motionless in the shadows near the entrance, listening to his sickening lies. He was literally wearing a tailored tuxedo funded by my stolen medical deposits while bragging about his hard work. But my greatest achievement is not financial, he continued, gesturing grandly toward the VIP table. My greatest achievement is sitting right there, my beautiful daughter, Chloe. The crowd offered a polite, muted round of applause. Chloe beamed, flashing a perfect practice smile. Chloe, you have always been the light of our home, my father said, his voice dripping with artificial emotion. You have carried yourself with such grace, such purity, and such elegance. You represent the very best of this family. And Preston, we are so incredibly thrilled to welcome you into our fold. Your parents have raised an outstanding young man. Our families share the exact same values. We believe in hard work, we believe in integrity, and we believe that true wealth is measured by the quality of the legacy we leave behind for our children. I felt a cold, sharp smile touch the corners of my mouth. Integrity. He was lecturing a room full of people about integrity while he was completely bankrupt and actively stealing from his other child. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime. That was when my mother Diane spotted me. She was standing near the edge of the stage, wearing a stunning imported silk gown. She had been scanning the crowd, making sure everyone was paying proper attention to my father's speech. Her eyes swept past the back tables and landed directly on me. I was standing near the drapery holding my heavy briefcase. My plain black dress was wrinkled. My hair was messy from sweating in the sun all morning. My face was streaked with gray dust from the garage. I did not look like I belonged in this room of designer suits and expensive jewelry. My mother's face went entirely rigid. Her eyes widened in absolute horror. She glanced frantically toward Preston's parents to see if they had noticed me standing in the shadows. When she saw they were still looking at my father, she let out a visible breath. She immediately began moving toward me, navigating through the maze of tables with rapid, aggressive strides. She reached the back of the tent and grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging painfully into my skin. "Sarah, what in the world are you doing in here?" she hissed, her voice a venomous, panicked whisper. "Your father told you specifically to stay in the garage. Look at you. You are covered in dirt. You look absolutely disgusting. You are going to humiliate us in front of Preston's family." I did not pull my arm away. I simply looked down at her hand and then up into her furious blue eyes. "I am not going back to the garage, Diane," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and low. My mother blinked, completely taken aback by my tone and my use of her first name. She had never heard me speak to her without total submission. "Excuse me?" she whispered, her eyes flashing with rage. "You will do exactly as you are told. You are going to walk out that door right now before anyone important sees you. We have spent months curating this event, and I will not let you ruin it. Get back outside." I did not move a single muscle. I stood my ground, staring at her with cold, blank eyes. My refusal to obey her silent, frantic commands caught the attention of the people sitting at the back tables. A few guests turned around to look at the commotion. The sudden movement caught my father's eye from the stage. Richard paused his grand speech. He looked over the heads of the crowd and saw my mother struggling to push me back toward the exit. He saw my messy hair and my dusty dress. He saw the exact aesthetic nightmare he had tried so hard to prevent. Instead of ignoring the situation, my father decided to use his ultimate weapon: public humiliation. He believed that if he shamed me in front of 150 people, I would shrink back into my obedient, subservient role and run away in tears. He raised the microphone back to his mouth and let out a loud, booming, patronizing laugh. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like our behind-the-scenes helper has wandered out of the staging area," my father announced to the entire tent. The guests shifted in their seats, turning around to look at me. Preston's parents frowned, staring at my dusty appearance with obvious judgment. Chloe covered her face with her hands, shaking her head in theatrical embarrassment. "Sarah, honey," my father continued, his voice dripping with condescension and fake warmth, "we appreciate all your hard work moving the chairs and dealing with the trash today. We really do. But the adults are trying to celebrate right now. Why do you not go back to the garage and let the caterers handle the rest of the evening? You do not want to ruin the aesthetic of the party now, do you?" A few people in the crowd chuckled softly, assuming it was a light-hearted family joke. My mother glared at me, a smug, victorious smirk forming on her lips. She thought he had won. She thought the sheer weight of the public embarrassment would crush me. But she did not know what I had seen on that cracked iPad. She did not know what I had downloaded onto my silver laptop. I did not shrink. I did not cry. I did not run out the door. I looked directly at my father standing on that brightly lit stage. Then I gently but firmly pried my mother's fingers off my arm, pushing her hand away. I gripped my leather briefcase and stepped completely out of the shadows and into the bright light of the crystal chandeliers. I began walking straight down the center aisle of the party tent. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, measured, confident pace of a senior financial analyst entering a boardroom. My cheap black shoes clicked against the temporary wooden flooring. I passed table after table of confused wealthy guests. I passed my mother, who was standing frozen in shock, completely paralyzed by my blatant defiance. "What is she doing?" my mother whispered loudly, her voice cracking with sudden panic. "Sarah, stop. Sarah, get back here right now." I ignored her. I kept my eyes focused entirely on the front of the room. I walked past the VIP table. I felt Chloe's furious glare burning into the side of my face. I saw Preston's highly religious father narrow his eyes, staring at me with deep disapproval. I did not care. Their opinions meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. I approached the audio-visual control table located just to the right of the main stage. A young technician wearing a black polo shirt was sitting behind a complex soundboard and a video mixing console. He looked up at me, completely bewildered, as I marched into his workspace. "Excuse me, miss, you cannot be back here," the technician said, standing up quickly. "This equipment is for the presentation." I set my heavy leather briefcase down on the table with a loud, solid thud. "I am the one who hired you," I told him, my voice cold and commanding. "I am Sarah, the financial guarantor for this entire event. Step aside." The technician looked at my stern expression, then looked up at my father on the stage, who was watching the scene unfold with growing confusion and anger. The technician swallowed hard and took a slow step back away from the console. My father lowered his champagne glass. The booming fake warmth completely vanished from his face, replaced by a dark, threatening scowl. "Sarah," he hissed into the microphone, his voice echoing loudly through the silent tent. "What do you think you are doing? I told you to go outside. Get away from that equipment immediately." I did not look at him. I reached down and unzipped my leather briefcase. I pulled out my silver laptop, the device that was already remotely connected to the massive digital projector suspended from the ceiling. I opened the screen. The blue light washed over my face. I quickly bypassed the lock screen and minimized the background windows. The presentation I had built in the freezing garage was sitting right there, perfectly cued and ready to launch. I reached across the soundboard and picked up the secondary wireless microphone resting next to the mixing console. I flicked the power switch on. A sharp electronic hum signaled that the microphone was live and connected to the main speaker system. I turned my back to my father. I turned my back to my mother, who was practically running down the center aisle toward the stage. I stepped away from the audiovisual table and walked to the very center of the dance floor, positioning myself directly between my father on the stage and the VIP table where Preston and his wealthy conservative parents were seated. I stood incredibly tall, ignoring the dust on my dress and the sweat on my neck. I raised the microphone to my lips. I locked my eyes directly onto Preston's father, making absolute, unwavering eye contact with the man my parents had destroyed my life to impress. The tent was dead silent. 150 people were holding their breath, waiting to see what the messy, disheveled daughter was about to do. I reached down to the silver laptop sitting on the audio-visual table. My finger hovered over the trackpad for a fraction of a second. I pressed play. The heavy mechanical hum of the massive digital projector suspended from the ceiling echoed through the sudden quiet of the party tent. A bright beam of concentrated light cut through the air directly above my head. The enormous 12-foot white canvas mounted behind the main stage instantly illuminated. The wealthy guests shifted in their padded wooden chairs, turning their attention toward the front of the room. They adjusted their posture, expecting to see a heartwarming romantic video montage. They expected to hear soft classical music playing while faded photographs of my parents' wedding day flashed across the screen. They expected a touching tribute to 35 years of perfect suburban bliss. Instead, the massive screen glared with a stark, blinding white background. There were no photographs of smiling families. There was no music. There was only a towering, high-resolution image of a sterile banking ledger. At the very top of the screen, massive bold black letters spelled out the title, Sarah's Monthly Medical Deposits. The guest squinted at the screen, completely confused by the spreadsheet. I raised the wireless microphone to my lips. My hand was not shaking. My voice did not tremble. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice boomed through the professional surround sound speakers echoing off the vaulted canvas ceiling of the tent. "My name is Sarah. I am Richard and Diane's oldest daughter. The messy, disheveled woman they just tried to banish to the garage, so I would not ruin their aesthetic." A collective murmur rippled through the seated crowd. Preston's highly traditional conservative parents leaned forward in their chairs, their brows furrowed in deep confusion. My father turned around on the stage to look at the massive screen behind him. The moment he saw the banking ledger, his flushed face completely drained of color. He dropped his crystal champagne glass. It hit the wooden stage floor and shattered, sending jagged pieces of glass flying across the polished surface. "Sarah, turn that off," my father yelled into his own microphone. His voice cracked with sudden, terrifying panic. "Turn that machine off right now." I glanced at the young audiovisual technician standing nervously beside me. "Cut his audio feed," I commanded, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. The technician swallowed hard and immediately slid a lever on the mixing console downward. My father's microphone went completely dead. He shouted again, but his voice was swallowed by the sheer size of the outdoor tent. For the past 4 years, my parents have claimed that my father was suffering from a severe and potentially fatal heart condition. I announced, my amplified voice ringing with absolute clarity. They told me his specialized treatments and experimental medications were incredibly expensive. They told me his health insurance was refusing to cover the costs. They told me he was going to die and leave our family bankrupt. I began walking slowly back and forth across the center of the dance floor, holding the microphone close. I looked directly into the eyes of the wealthy guests who had been drinking my imported champagne. "I loved my father," continued. "I was terrified of losing him. So I did what any devoted daughter would do. I took on a massive workload at my accounting firm. I worked 60-hour weeks. I drove a broken-down 10-year-old car. I lived in a tiny rundown apartment. I packed my lunch every single day and I skipped every single vacation. I sacrificed every ounce of my youth to keep him alive." I gestured with my free hand toward the enormous screen above the stage. As you can clearly see on the verified banking ledgers projected behind me, I deposited exactly $2,500 of my own salary into a joint medical reserve account on the first day of every single month for 48 consecutive months. That is $30,000 a year. That is $120,000 in total cash. The crowd was dead silent now. The uncomfortable shifting had completely stopped. 150 people were staring at the screen, processing the undeniable math laid out in neat, highlighted rows. Preston's father, a man who built his entire reputation on financial integrity and transparency, took off his reading glasses and stared at the massive numbers with absolute horrified fascination. My mother, Diane, finally unfroze. She rushed toward me, her silk gown rustling loudly. "Sarah, you are having a mental breakdown," she shouted, trying to project her voice to the crowd without a microphone. "Somebody call security. She is unwell. She does not know what she is saying." I did not even look at her. I pressed the wireless remote in my hand and clicked to the next slide. The screen flashed. The banking ledgers vanished, replaced by a horrifying digital collage of luxury receipts and credit card statements. The massive black text at the top of the screen read, "The reality of Richard medical expenses." But as you can see on the screen behind me, my father is not sick. I announced, my voice growing colder and sharper with every single word. My father does not have a heart condition. My father has a spending problem and a profound lack of morality. Gasps erupted from his back tables. Chloe, my golden child sister, stood up from the VIP table, her face chalk white. She looked at the screen and covered her mouth with both trembling hands. I pointed directly at the massive projected image. On November 12th, my father begged me for $8,000 to start an experimental cardiovascular program, I told the crowd. I liquidated my personal savings to give it to him. If you look at the screen, you will see that on November 14th, that exact same $8,000 was used to purchase 2 first-class round-trip airline tickets to Aspen, Colorado, and a luxury ski resort suite booked explicitly under my sister Chloe's name. Chloe let out a strangled, sobbing gasp. Preston's mother turned to look at her future daughter-in-law, her eyes wide with total disgust. I clicked the laser pointer highlighting another massive transaction on the 12-foot screen. On March 3rd, I worked 3 weekends of overtime to buy my father a $4,000 ambulatory heart monitor. I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly through the tent. But if you look at the merchant code on the screen, that $4,000 was actually spent at a designer bridal boutique in Manhattan. The memo line clearly reads, Chloe Custom Veil and Alterations. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, evolving into an angry, chaotic buzz. People were pointing at the screen, pointing at my father, pointing at Chloe. My father stepped off the stage and began marching toward me. His fists clenched, his face twisted with absolute fury. "Give me that microphone, you ungrateful liar!" he bellowed, his voice raw and shaking. I stood my ground, placing myself directly in front of the VIP table. I looked Preston's father right in the eye as I delivered the final financial blow. And on April 18th, my father told me he needed a massive down payment to secure a spot on a surgical waiting list for a valve replacement. I paid early withdrawal penalties on my retirement portfolio to give him $15,000. But as you can see outlined in bright red on the screen, that $15,000 did not go to a hospital. It went to a luxury country club. It was the non-refundable deposit for the wedding of Chloe and Preston. Preston's father slammed his hand down on the table, making the silverware rattle. He looked at my father, who had stopped dead in his tracks, terrified by the wealthy patriarch's sudden, explosive anger. "You stole from your own child to pay for my son's wedding, Preston's father," asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that carried across the dance floor. "You sat in my home and talked to me about traditional family values, while draining this young woman's retirement fund." My father opened his mouth to speak, but he was completely suffocating on his own lies. He looked at the massive screen showing his blatant financial fraud, and then looked at the furious faces of the wealthy peers he had tried so desperately to impress. He had absolutely nowhere to run. This entire 35th anniversary gala is a total fraud. I announced to the room, making sure every single guest heard me. The luxury tent you are sitting in, the imported white orchids, the valet parking the string quartet, I paid for all of it. Because my father told me his medical bills were simply too high to cover a party for my mother. He let me empty my bank accounts to build this illusion for you. "Sarah, please," Chloe wailed from the VIP table, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Please stop doing this. You are ruining my life." "Preston, tell her to stop." Preston did not look at her. He was staring at the screen, reading the itemized receipts for the country club dues and the luxury spa treatments his fiancée had enjoyed using stolen money. He looked physically sick. I turned my attention to my sister. "I am not ruining your life, Chloe," I said, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "I'm just introducing your new family to the real you, because financial fraud is only half of the story. I want everyone in this room to understand exactly how this family talks about the people who love them." I tightened my grip on the wireless remote. I had dismantled their finances. I had destroyed their fake wealthy persona. Now it was time to expose the profound emotional depravity that lived at the very core of their hearts. I clicked the button to advance to the third and final slide. The screen flashed one last time. The financial documents vanished. In their place, an enormous high-resolution photograph of a cracked iPad screen appeared on the 12-foot canvas. The image was magnified so intensely that the text messages were clearly legible from the very last row of the party tent. There was no title on this slide. There was only the brutal, undeniable reality of their private group chat. The names Diane and Chloe were prominently displayed at the top of the message thread. The crowd leaned forward, squinting to read the massive text bubbles. The ambient noise in the tent began to die down, replaced by a tense, horrified silence. I raised the microphone to my lips. For anyone struggling to read the screen in the back, I will gladly narrate, I said. These messages were sent by my mother and my sister less than 1 hour ago while you were all arriving at this party. My mother, Diane, let out a sharp, terrified shriek. She lunged toward the audiovisual table, trying to rip the cables out of the laptop. But the young technician stood up and physically blocked her path, crossing his arms over his chest. He was looking at the screen too, and he looked utterly disgusted by her. I began reading the messages aloud, my voice ringing with cold, hard finality. At 7:15 p.m., my sister Chloe sent this message to my mother. Did you hide Sarah yet? Preston's parents are pulling up to the valet stand right now. His mother is wearing Chanel. If she sees Sarah sweating in that cheap, ugly dress, she's going to think we are trash. Please tell me Dad got rid of her. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. Several women at the front tables covered their mouths in shock. Preston's mother. The woman wearing Chanel looked at Chloe with an expression of pure, unadulterated revulsion. I continued reading, refusing to let the momentum drop. And at 7:16 p.m., my mother Diane replied with this. Your father put her in the garage. She is so gullible, she will just sit out there in the dark and wait for permission to come back inside. I am going to tell her that your dad's heart medication went up again next month, so she feels bad and pays for your luxury bridal shower in Manhattan. Do not worry, sweetie. Your aesthetic is completely safe. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating, deafening silence. 150 people were staring at the massive glowing text messages suspended above the stage. The sheer calculated malice of those words projected in letters 3 feet high could not be explained away. It could not be blamed on a misunderstanding. It was the undeniable proof of a family that viewed their own flesh and blood as nothing more than a disposable walking ATM. I lowered the microphone. I did not need to say another word. The screen had done all the talking for me. I stood in the center of the dance floor looking at the ashes of the fake empire my parents had spent 35 years building. They were completely exposed. Their wealth was a lie. Their morality was a lie. Their entire lives were a lie. And now every single person who mattered to them knew the exact ugly truth. The massive 12-foot screen cast a harsh white glow over the entire party tent. The undeniable proof of my parents' cruelty hung suspended in the air above the main stage. The silence in the room was so absolute that I could hear the canvas fabric of the tent shifting slightly in the night breeze. 150 wealthy guests were staring at the projected text messages, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal they had just witnessed. Then the silence shattered. "Turn it off!" my father bellowed. His voice was a raw, guttural roar that tore through the quiet tent. He lunged toward the audio-visual table, his face contorted into a mask of pure, desperate rage. "Turn that machine off right now. You are lying. You fabricated all of this to destroy your sister." He grabbed the edge of the mixing console, trying to reach the laptop, but the young audio-visual technician stood his ground, pushing my father back with a firm hand against his chest. "Do not touch my equipment, sir," the technician warned loudly. My father stumbled backward, his custom-tailored tuxedo suddenly looking foolish and out of place on a man who was actively crumbling into dust. He spun around to face the crowd, throwing his hands into the air in a wild, frantic gesture. "Do not look at that screen," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "She is sick. Sarah has always been deeply unwell. She is jealous of Chloe. She hacked into my accounts and manufactured these fake messages because she wants to ruin this beautiful anniversary." I stood in the center of the dance floor, perfectly still. I did not need to defend myself. I did not need to argue with him. The bank routing numbers, the timestamps, the merchant identification codes, they were all irrefutable data points. I was a certified public accountant, and my audit was absolutely flawless. The wealthy guests sitting at the round tables were smart, successful people. They ran businesses. They managed portfolios. They knew exactly what a certified bank ledger looked like. They knew my father was lying. From the VIP table, my sister Chloe launched into a theatrical performance of absolute hysteria. She pushed her chair back so violently that it tipped over and crashed onto the temporary wooden floor. She threw herself onto Preston, grabbing the lapels of his expensive suit jacket. "Preston, you have to believe me," Chloe wailed, her face a mess of streaming tears and ruined makeup. "I never sent those messages. I swear to God, I never typed those things. Sarah hates me. She has always hated me because you chose me, and nobody ever chose her. She is trying to poison you against me. Please, Preston, tell them it is a lie." Preston did not wrap his arms around her. He did not pull her close to comfort her. He sat completely frozen, staring up at the massive 12-foot screen. He was reading the exact text message where Chloe complained about hiding me in the garage so I would not ruin her aesthetic. He was looking at the credit card statement showing that his luxury engagement vacation to Aspen was funded by money stolen from an emergency medical account. Preston's father slowly stood up from the VIP table. He was a tall, imposing man who had built a massive fortune in commercial real estate. He was deeply conservative, highly traditional, and absolutely uncompromising when it came to personal integrity and financial transparency. He commanded respect simply by entering a room. When he stood up, the chaotic buzzing of the horrified guests instantly died down. Everyone watched him, waiting to see how the patriarch of the elite family would react to this massive suburban scandal. He ignored Chloe, who was still weeping loudly and clinging to his son's jacket. He ignored my mother Diane, who was standing near the stage, shaking and covering her face with her hands. He looked directly at my father. Richard Preston's father set his voice a low, dangerous rumble that echoed across the silent tent. "We sat in my private study last month. We drank my scotch. We shook hands. You looked me directly in the eye and told me that your family shared our strict moral values. You told me that you believed in hard work, honesty, and the sanctity of the family unit." My father swallowed hard, a bead of sweat rolling down the side of his face. He took a hesitant step toward the VIP table, holding his hands out in a pleading gesture. "Please, you have to listen to me," he stammered. "I can explain the finances. It is a massive misunderstanding. The medical bills, they were complicated. I moved money around to protect the family assets. You stole from your own child." Preston's father interrupted, his tone dripping with absolute glacial disgust. "You faked a terminal illness. You drained your daughter's life savings to pay for your country club dues. And you sat at my dinner table boasting about your business success while your child was working 60-hour weeks to keep you out of bankruptcy." My father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was completely trapped. I have dealt with ruthless businessmen and cutthroat competitors my entire life. Preston's father continued, his eyes locked onto my father's pale, sweating face. "But I have never in all my years encountered a man so profoundly devoid of a moral compass. You are a complete fraud, Richard. You have no wealth. You have no honor. You have absolutely nothing. My family does not associate with thieves, and we certainly do not marry into families that treat their own blood like disposable garbage." He turned his attention down to his son. "Preston," he said quietly but firmly, "we are leaving." Preston slowly stood up from his chair. Chloe let out a desperate, terrified scream, grabbing his arm with both hands. "No, Preston, please," she begged, dropping to her knees on the wooden floor right in front of him. "You love me. We are getting married. You promised me. You cannot leave me here with them. She is a liar. Sarah is a lying, jealous monster." Preston looked down at her. The adoration and warmth that had been in his eyes all evening was completely gone. It was replaced by a cold, hollow realization. He had fallen in love with an illusion. He had proposed to a carefully curated aesthetic. The real Chloe was the woman on the 12-foot screen. The real Chloe was a parasite who laughed with her mother about bleeding her sister dry. He gently but firmly pried her fingers off his jacket sleeve. He reached down and took her left hand in his. Chloe gasped, looking up at him with a sudden flare of desperate hope, thinking he was going to hold her hand and comfort her. Instead, Preston slid the massive diamond engagement ring right off her finger. No, Chloe shrieked a sound so raw and agonizing it made several guests flinch. Give it back. That is mine. You gave that to me. Preston did not say a single word. He did not yell. He did not insult her. He simply turned around and placed the glittering diamond ring down on the empty white silk tablecloth. The small clink of the metal hitting the table sounded incredibly loud in the dead silent tent. He turned his back on my sister, who was now sobbing hysterically on the floor. He joined his parents, and the three of them began walking down the center aisle of the tent, moving with quiet, dignified precision. As they passed me, Preston's father stopped for a fraction of a second. He looked at me, his expression softening into something that looked incredibly close to respect. He gave me a single small nod, acknowledging the absolute courage it took to stand up and expose the rotting core of my own family. Then he continued walking, disappearing out the back entrance of the tent and into the cool, dark night. The departure of the wealthy Fief's UIP family was the final fatal blow to my parents' fake empire. The illusion was completely shattered. The guests sitting at the round tables began whispering frantically to each other. Some were pulling out their phones, probably texting their friends about the massive scandal unfolding before their eyes. Others were looking at my father, with expressions of open, undeniable disgust. They realized they had been invited to this party simply to serve as props in a grand theatrical lie. My father sank into a chair near the stage, burying his face in his hands. He looked like a deflated balloon. The tailored tuxedo he wore suddenly looked like a cheap costume. My mother Diane was standing nearby, completely paralyzed, staring blankly at the massive screen where her cruel text messages were still glowing brightly for all the world to see. Her social standing, her reputation, her carefully maintained aesthetic, it was all completely destroyed in a matter of minutes. Just as the chaotic murmuring of the crowd began to reach a fever pitch, the heavy canvas flap at the rear entrance of the tent was pushed aside. Julianne, the owner of the luxury catering company, stepped into the tent. She was no longer acting like the background staff. She was not trying to be invisible. She walked with purpose, carrying a thick black leather folder, holding the final invoice for the event. She marched straight down the center aisle, moving past the whispering guests and the empty tables until she reached the center of the dance floor, right where I was standing. She did not look at me. She looked directly at my father, who lifted his head from his hands and stared at her with bloodshot, panicked eyes. "Excuse me, everyone," Julianne announced, her voice projecting clearly across the room without the need for a microphone. "I apologize for the interruption, but there is a major logistical issue that needs to be addressed immediately." The crowd hushed, waiting for the next dramatic turn in this unbelievable evening. "Mr. Vance," Julianne said, looking down at my father with professional coldness. "1 hour ago, you provided me with your personal premium rewards credit card to settle the final $25,000 balance for tonight dinner service and open bar. I am standing here to inform you in front of your guests that your credit card was completely rejected by the merchant processor." My father opened his mouth to argue, but Julianne did not let him speak. "Your account declined for insufficient funds," she continued, her voice ringing with absolute finality. "I contacted your banking institution, and they confirmed that you have absolutely zero available credit and zero available cash. Because you have fundamentally breached the terms of our vendor contract by failing to provide valid payment, I have exercised my legal right to cancel all catering services for this evening." The guests gasped, turning to look at each other in absolute shock. The wealthy suburban neighbors, who had been sitting patiently waiting for their prime rib and imported caviar, suddenly realized they were sitting at a completely empty table in a completely empty tent. "My staff has already broken down the kitchen," Julianne stated, gesturing toward the dark, empty staging area behind the main canvas walls. "The appetizers, the dinner service, the dessert courses, and the premium alcohol have all been successfully repossessed and loaded back into our refrigerated commercial trucks. My catering team is currently driving off the property. There will be no food served tonight. There will be no champagne poured. This event is officially over." She dropped the thick black leather folder onto the nearest empty dining table. The heavy thud echoed through the silent room. That is your itemized cancellation invoice, Mr. Vance. It details the non-refundable deposits you have already lost. Have a good evening." Julianne turned on her heel and walked out of the tent, her head held high. She had saved her small business from my parents' toxic financial ruin, and she had delivered the absolute final nail in the coffin of their public reputation. I stood in the center of the dance floor, looking at the absolute devastation surrounding me. My father was weeping quietly in his chair, a broken, bankrupt man who had sacrificed his only loyal child for a fleeting moment of fake glory. My mother was staring blankly into space, her mind completely unable to process the total destruction of her social life. My sister Chloe was still sitting on the wooden floor, rocking back and forth, staring at the empty white tablecloth where her multi-$1,000 engagement ring used to sit. The wealthy guests slowly began to stand up from their chairs. Nobody said goodbye to my parents. Nobody offered them sympathy. They simply gathered their coats and purses and began walking silently toward the exit, eager to escape the suffocating, toxic atmosphere of the party tent. They walked past me, casting cautious, respectful glances in my direction. They knew exactly who had won this war. I looked up at the massive 12-foot projector screen one last time. The text messages were still glowing brightly, casting a stark white light over the empty tables and the shattered crystal glass on the floor. "Hide Sarah. She is so gullible. Your aesthetic is completely safe." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the wireless presentation remote, and clicked the power button. The massive projector instantly clicked off. The 12-foot canvas went entirely black, plunging the front of the tent into deep, heavy shadows. I did not say a single word to my father. I did not look at my mother. I walked over to the audiovisual table, picked up my heavy leather briefcase carrying my silver laptop, and turned toward the exit. I walked out of the massive white tent, leaving them alone in the dark, surrounded by empty tables and the absolute undeniable reality of their own horrific choices. The cool night air felt incredibly clean in my lungs. I walked across the dark gravel driveway toward my beat-up 10-year-old sedan. I was driving away with my hard-earned money safely secured in a private account, and I was never coming back. I was finally completely free. I walked across the dark gravel driveway toward my beat-up 10-year-old sedan. The crisp night air filled my lungs, and for the first time in what felt like a decade, I could breathe completely. I did not look back at the massive white party tent. I did not look back at the sprawling suburban house that had served as the headquarters for my own personal financial prison. I unlocked my car door, tossed my heavy leather briefcase onto the passenger seat, and slid behind the steering wheel. When I turned the key in the ignition, the old engine rattled and coughed before roaring to life. For years, my mother had complained that the sound of my car ruined the peaceful aesthetic of their neighborhood. Tonight, it sounded like absolute freedom. As I pulled out of the driveway and turned onto the quiet suburban street, I felt a profound, undeniable lightness spreading through my entire body. The crushing, suffocating weight of my father's imaginary medical crisis was completely gone. I was no longer carrying the burden of their vanity. I drove back to my tiny apartment in the city, listening to the steady hum of the highway tires hitting the pavement. I did not turn on the radio. I simply sat in the quiet, appreciating the absolute peace of a life that finally belonged entirely to me. Over the next 48 hours, my cell phone transformed into a relentless beacon of panic and desperation. I sat on my cheap second-hand couch, wrapped in a warm blanket, drinking tea, and watching the notification counter climb higher and higher. I did not answer a single call. I let every single one go directly to voicemail. By Sunday evening, I had received 43 separate messages. I sat in my quiet living room and listened to them, playing them out loud, just to remind myself of the exact reality I had escaped. The first few voicemails from my father were dripping with unhinged, explosive rage. He screamed into the receiver, demanding that I immediately unfreeze his credit lines. He threatened to call the police and have me arrested for grand larceny, claiming I had illegally stolen his money. He shouted that I had completely humiliated him in front of the most important people in his life, and that I was going to pay for what I had done. I listened to his threats with a calm, steady heartbeat. As a certified public accountant, I knew the exact letter of the law. I was a legal co-signer on those accounts. Every single penny I withdrew was legally mine. He had absolutely no legal recourse, and by Sunday morning he finally realized it. His rage slowly morphed into pathetic desperation. The later voicemails featured a completely different tone. He was crying, begging me to transfer the $40,000 back to him. He said the bank was threatening to initiate foreclosure proceedings on the house because they had missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments trying to pay for the anniversary gala. He pleaded with me to remember the good times we shared when I was a child. He tried to manipulate my empathy, but my empathy had completely run dry. My mother's voicemails were entirely focused on the destruction of her social standing. She sobbed into the phone telling me that her friends were refusing to return her calls. She said the women from the country club had completely ostracized her. She blamed me for the sudden agonizing death of her perfectly curated reputation. She wailed that I had ruined the family aesthetic forever, and that she was too embarrassed to even walk into the local grocery store. She did not apologize for stealing my money. She only apologized for the fact that she had been caught. Then there were the voicemails from my sister Chloe. Chloe left 8 messages completely dominated by hysterical theatrical screaming. She informed me that Preston had officially broken off their engagement. He had sent his father lawyers to their house to formally demand the return of all gifts and family heirlooms. Without Preston's wealthy conservative family to cover the remaining vendor balances, Chloe's extravagant luxury wedding was completely canceled. She screamed that I had destroyed her one chance at a perfect life. She said she was stuck with $50,000 in non-refundable vendor contracts that she could never pay. She called me a monster. She called me a jealous parasite. I deleted her voicemails with a single press of a button. The immediate financial consequences of my actions hit my parents like a freight train hitting a brick wall. By Monday morning, the reality of their situation became absolute public knowledge. Because I had permanently locked the home equity line of credit and frozen all the authorized credit cards, my father had absolutely zero access to liquid capital. His personal checking account was already completely overdrawn from his reckless spending. The $40,000 I had secured and transferred back to my private account was the very last safety net they possessed. Without my money to artificially inflate their lifestyle, their fake empire collapsed under the crushing weight of its own debt. I received a notification from the Credit Monitoring Bureau on Tuesday afternoon. My parents had officially missed their final grace period for their massive luxury car loans and their high-interest consumer credit cards. Collection agencies were immediately assigned to their accounts. The bridal boutique in Manhattan, where my father had spent $4,000 of my money on Chloe's custom veil, initiated a civil lawsuit against them for the remaining unpaid balance of the wedding dress. The exclusive Silver Pines Country Club formally terminated their membership for non-payment of dues, effectively barring my mother from the only social circle she cared about. They were plunged into immediate, inescapable bankruptcy. For years, they had leveraged every single ounce of their home equity and personal credit to buy designer clothes, first-class flights, and imported furniture. They had lived spectacularly beyond their means, relying completely on the $2,500 I deposited every single month to cover the minimum payments on their staggering debts. The moment I removed my financial pillar, the entire structure imploded. They had no savings. They had no assets that were not heavily mortgaged. They were drowning in a sea of their own vanity, and this time there was no gullible workhorse daughter available to throw them a life preserver. By Wednesday, my parents realized that their screaming voicemails and desperate pleas were having absolutely no effect on me. I continued going to my accounting firm. I continued attending my client meetings, and I continued living my life with absolute peaceful detachment. Because direct manipulation had failed, my parents decided to deploy their final remaining tactic. They tried to weaponize religion and community guilt against me. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a quarterly tax audit when my cell phone rang. The caller identification displayed the name of the conservative community church my parents had attended for the past 20 years. I knew exactly what this was. I picked up my phone and pressed the green accept button, placing the call on speakerphone. "Hello, Sarah." A deep, solemn voice spoke through the speaker. "This is Pastor Miller from the community congregation. I have Elder Thomas and Elder Harrison sitting here in the office with me. We are calling you today on behalf of your parents, Richard and Diane." "Good afternoon, gentlemen," I replied, my voice completely calm and professional. "How can I help you?" "Sarah, your parents came to our offices this morning in a state of profound spiritual and emotional distress." Pastor Miller continued, using a tone dripping with heavy moral judgment. "They confessed that there was a terrible misunderstanding at their anniversary celebration. They told us that you became deeply confused about their finances and caused a very painful public scene. They are praying for your soul, Sarah. They want to offer you the grace of forgiveness. We are calling to mediate a peaceful family reconciliation so you can honor your mother and father as the scripture commands. We urge you to return the funds you withheld so your family can heal and avoid financial ruin." I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, staring out the window at the bustling city streets below. My parents had actually gone to the leaders of their church and lied to their faces, portraying themselves as the innocent victims of a confused, hysterical daughter. They were using these men to bully me into giving my money back. "Pastor Miller," I said, keeping my voice razor sharp and utterly devoid of emotion, "I am going to stop you right there. I am a certified public accountant. I deal entirely in documented facts, not spiritual manipulation. There was no misunderstanding at that anniversary party. My parents deliberately faked a terminal heart condition for 4 consecutive years. They intentionally stole over $120,000 of my personal income to fund luxury vacations, country club memberships, and designer clothing for my sister. They committed gross financial exploitation." The line went completely quiet. The 3 church leaders were stunned into absolute silence. I have complete copies of every single banking ledger, every single credit card statement, and every single cruel text message where they bragged about exploiting me. I continued, ensuring my tone left absolutely no room for doubt or debate. I displayed all of that evidence on a 12-foot projector screen in front of 150 witnesses, including Preston's family. If my parents told you anything else, they are actively lying to you. But Sarah, Pastor Miller stammered, clearly derailed by my absolute certainty. "They are facing complete bankruptcy. They are about to lose their home. Surely as a daughter you must feel some obligation to." "I feel absolutely no obligation," I interrupted firmly. "They made their choices. Now they are experiencing the consequences. And since they asked you to contact me, I have a message I need you to deliver directly to Richard and Diane. I want you to tell them to listen to this warning very carefully." I leaned closer to the speakerphone. "I have spent the last 4 years documenting every single transfer I made under the false pretense of a medical emergency. I have the digital proof that they intentionally deceived me for financial gain. If my parents attempt to contact me again, if my sister attempts to contact me again, or if they ever send another proxy to harass me at my place of work, I will immediately file a formal report with the authorities. I will initiate aggressive civil litigation against them for wire fraud and financial abuse. I will hand over every single piece of evidence to the district attorney, and I will gladly testify against them in open court." The silence on the line was heavy and suffocating. "Please tell Richard and Diane that the bank accounts are closed," I concluded, my voice ringing with total finality. "The money is gone. If they ever reach out to me again, they will be speaking directly to my legal counsel. Do you understand me, Pastor Miller?" "Yes, Sarah." Pastor Miller whispered, his voice completely devoid of its previous moral authority. "I understand. We will deliver the message." I ended the call and set my phone face down on my desk. I looked at the complicated tax documents spread out in front of me. For 32 years I had carried the massive, crushing weight of a family that only viewed me as a disposable resource. I had sacrificed my youth, my happiness, and my financial security to buy their approval. But sitting in my quiet office, knowing that my money was safe and my future was finally my own, I felt absolutely nothing but peace. The ties were permanently cut. The toxic empire was completely burned to the ground. I picked up my pen and went back to work. 6 months have passed since the night I walked out of that massive white party tent and left my family sitting in the dark ruins of their own fraudulent empire. It is a crisp, bright Tuesday morning in late September. I am sitting at the pristine quartz kitchen island of my brand new home, holding a warm cup of coffee and watching the golden morning sunlight stream through the large bay windows. I do not feel a single ounce of dread in my chest. I do not feel the familiar suffocating panic of wondering how I'm going to pay an imaginary medical bill. I do not have to check my bank accounts to see if my father has drained my emergency savings to buy imported champagne or designer clothes. I just feel absolute pristine silence. The kind of silence that only comes when you finally decide to cut the toxic anchors dragging you down to the bottom of the ocean. I took the $40,000 I had rightfully reclaimed from that joint medical account on the night of the anniversary gala, and I used every single penny of it as a down payment on a beautiful 3-bedroom townhouse. It is located in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood just outside the city center. It has gleaming hardwood floors, high vaulted ceilings, and a massive master bedroom with a walk-in closet. Best of all, it does not have a dark, dusty, detached garage, smelling of old motor oil and damp cardboard. I filled my new home with beautiful things that I chose for myself. I bought plush, comfortable furniture. I bought expensive artwork to hang on the freshly painted walls. I finally traded in my rattling 10-year-old sedan for a sleek, reliable, brand new car. For the first time in my entire adult life, I am actually enjoying the fruits of my own labor. I am no longer living like a desperate, impoverished student, just so my family can masquerade as suburban royalty. My professional life has also experienced a massive, spectacular transformation. For 4 years, I had been an exhausted, terrified workhorse at my accounting firm. I was always the first one in the office, and the last one to leave, completely fueled by the desperate, manic need to generate enough overtime pay to keep my father alive. But once that crushing emotional burden was permanently lifted, my entire approach to my career changed. I was no longer working out of blind fear. I was working out of genuine passion and ambition. I channeled all of my newly freed energy into securing massive corporate accounts and executing flawless, high-level financial audits. My managing directors absolutely noticed the profound shift in my confidence and my performance. Last month, I was called into the main executive boardroom. They did not banish me to the shadows. They did not treat me like disposable hired help. They handed me a thick leather-bound portfolio and officially promoted me to senior partner at the firm. I now have my own massive corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the downtown skyline. I have a team of junior accountants working under my direct supervision. I have a salary that exceeds anything my father ever made during his entire mediocre career. The validation and respect I had spent my entire childhood desperately trying to earn from my parents, I finally gave to myself, and I earned it in the real world through my own undeniable merit. I have maintained a policy of absolute strict no contact with my biological family since the day after the anniversary disaster. I blocked their phone numbers. I blocked their email addresses. I blocked all of their social media profiles. But in the wealthy suburban circles they used to inhabit, gossip is an incredibly powerful, unstoppable force. I did not have to seek out information about their inevitable downfall. The news of their spectacular social and financial collapse naturally filtered back to me through mutual acquaintances and former neighbors who were absolutely eager to share the dramatic details. My parents' desperate attempts to maintain their wealthy aesthetic completely imploded within weeks of the canceled gala, because I had permanently frozen the home equity line of credit and locked all the authorized credit cards. They were plunged into an immediate, inescapable financial death spiral. They had absolutely zero liquid capital and a mountain of terrifying high-interest consumer debt. Without my monthly deposits to artificially inflate their bank accounts, they defaulted on their massive mortgage almost instantly. The bank initiated aggressive foreclosure proceedings. The sprawling upscale suburban home with the imported marble foyer where my father had proudly lectured me about ruining his image was legally seized by the lending institution. My parents were unceremoniously evicted from the property. They were forced to rapidly downsize, liquidating their expensive designer furniture and their luxury vehicles at massive, humiliating losses just to satisfy their aggressive creditors. They currently live in a cramped, outdated two-bedroom apartment on the undesirable side of the city. My father, who used to brag loudly about his success to anyone who would listen, is now working a miserable, low-paying administrative job at a local shipping logistics company, just to cover their basic grocery bills. My mother, Diane, who used to spend her afternoons getting hot stone massages and sipping wine at the Silver Pines Country Club, is now isolated and completely alone in that tiny apartment. Her wealthy friends permanently cut her out of their social circles the moment they realized she was a bankrupt fraud who stole from her own child. She has no country club. She has no galas. She has no aesthetic left to protect. She is living the exact bleak, impoverished reality she had always looked down upon. The poetic justice of my sister Chloe's new reality is perhaps the most satisfying detail of all. When Preston and his traditional conservative family walked out of the anniversary tent, they did not just take back the massive diamond engagement ring. They completely erased Chloe from their universe. They blocked her number and instructed their private security to turn her away if she ever showed up at their gated estate. Without Preston's wealthy family to bail her out, Chloe was left holding the bag for tens of thousands of dollars in canceled, non-refundable wedding contracts. Her aspiring lifestyle blog collapsed entirely because she no longer had access to the luxury vacations, the designer clothing, or the expensive backdrops required to maintain her fake influencer persona online. Reality hit her with brutal, unforgiving force. My golden child sister, who had spent her entire life acting like she was too delicate for hard work and too important to treat service workers with basic human respect, was forced to enter the actual labor market. Chloe is currently working an entry-level retail job at a mid-tier clothing store in a local shopping mall. She spends 40 hours a week standing on her feet folding sweaters, organizing clearance racks, and dealing with rude, demanding customers. She is wearing a cheap polyester uniform and a plastic name tag. She has become the exact type of hired help she used to mock me for resembling. Every time she has to smile and apologize to an irritated shopper over a wrinkled shirt, I hope she remembers the night she sat in a luxury tent and laughed about hiding her sister in a garage. She is finally learning exactly what it means to actually work for a living, and she is doing it entirely on her own without a gullible sister available to foot the bill. Sitting here in my beautiful sunlit kitchen, I have spent a lot of time reflecting on the psychological trap that kept me imprisoned for so many years. Society conditioning heavily pushes the narrative that family is an unbreakable, absolute bond. We are taught from a very young age that blood is thicker than water and that we must honor our parents no matter what they do to us. We are conditioned to believe that family loyalty requires endless, unconditional sacrifice. That is a dangerous, toxic lie. Family is absolutely not a blank check for financial exploitation. DNA is not an excuse for emotional abuse. The fact that someone shares your genetic code does not give them the right to treat you like a disposable resource, a walking automated teller machine, or a shameful secret to be hidden away in the dark. Love is not supposed to be a transactional currency where you constantly have to buy your seat at the table. For 32 years, I believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I just sacrificed enough of my own happiness, if I just paid enough of their bills, they would eventually see my worth. I thought I could purchase their genuine affection through my endless compliance. But toxic people do not respect sacrifice. They simply consume it. They view your empathy as a weakness to be exploited, and they will gladly drain you dry until there is absolutely nothing left but an empty shell. They will take your money, your youth, and your sanity, and they will never offer you a single genuine thank you in return. The moment I sat in that freezing, dusty garage and saw the undeniable truth on my laptop screen was the most painful moment of my life. But it was also the most profoundly liberating moment of my entire existence. The truth hurts, but it cuts away the diseased parts of your life, so the healthy parts can finally heal and grow. Setting boundaries with abusive family members is not an act of cruelty. It is not an act of betrayal. It is the greatest, most necessary act of self-respect a person can possibly achieve. Walking away from the people who intentionally hurt you is how you reclaim your own future. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that made you sick. You cannot thrive while carrying the crushing weight of people who refuse to carry themselves. I look around my peaceful, elegant home. I think about my thriving career and the amazing, supportive, chosen family of friends and colleagues I have built around me. None of this would exist if I had stayed in that garage. None of this would exist if I had let them steal my $40,000 to pay for a catering bill they could not afford. My entire beautiful life was waiting for me right on the other side of the word no. If you have ever been the workhorse in your family, remember you are not required to set yourself on fire to keep toxic people warm. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment, letting me know where you are watching from and what time it is there. Always choose yourself.